Chapter 1608. Asking for trouble in the Baifang's memories. Although there were several teleportation arrays in the blood-refining mansion, none of them led to the Green Lotus Mansion or even the nearby Green Lotus Mansion. As for whether there were other methods, the Baifang's memories didn't mention them. After all, the central region was so big, and the Baifang couldn't have been to every mansion. Coincidentally, the blood-refining mansion was a mansion that the Baifang wasn't familiar with. With a light sigh, Zhuowen sat up. He knew that if he wanted to find a suitable route, he would have to go out and ask someone. After calling out to Long Tian, the two of them walked out of the inn. When they reached the entrance, the girl named Xiao Yu was still meditating cross-legged. Zhuowen nodded slightly. This Xiao Yu's requirements for herself were extremely harsh. Whenever she had time, she would spend it on cultivation. Although Zhuowen didn't know why Xiao Yu was so hardworking in her cultivation, Zhuowen appreciated this kind of cultivator who could make up for her lack of talent through hard work. Talent wasn't something that all cultivators possessed. This kind of thing was destined by the heavens and couldn't be changed. Therefore, some people were born geniuses. Just by casually cultivating, they could increase their cultivation to the point where it would take an ordinary cultivator a long time to cultivate. The heavens were unfair, but one's fate was in their own hands. If one's talent wasn't good enough and didn't know how to work hard, then this kind of person would never be able to reach the top. They wouldn't even have the qualifications to climb the peak. As for someone like Xiao Yu, her talent might not be comparable to those monstrous geniuses, but if she worked hard in her cultivation, there would be a day when she would have a harvest of her own. The two of you only stayed here for a day and already went out. Xiao Yu slowly opened her beautiful eyes and looked at Zhuowen and Long Tian in surprise. Yes, there are some things that we need to do, Zhuowen said with a smile. Xiao Yu frowned and shook her head. You two are wasting spirit stones like this. Both of you have already paid the monthly payment, so you can cultivate for a month before going out. This way, you won't waste spirit stones and won't delay your cultivation. This is the best of both worlds. Hearing Xiao Yu's reproachful words, Long Tian's gaze was a little strange. If Xiao Yu was aware of their cultivation, she would not have said such words. When Long Tian wanted to remind her, Zhuowen raised his hand to stop Long Tian. He smiled at Xiao Yu and said, Miss Xiao Yu is right. However, this matter is very important to the two of us, so we have to go out and do it. Xiao Yu frowned and sighed. Since that is the case, you can leave. Remember to come back early. Cultivation is not easy. Time is extremely precious to us cultivators. Zhuowen smiled. With his cultivation, he could completely ignore Xiao Yu's reminder. However, this was the latter's good intention. Zhuowen naturally wouldn't expose her, nor would he show off his cultivation. After Zhuowen and Long Tian left, Xiao Yu shook her head slightly and muttered to herself, the aura of the two of them isn't strong. They are around the low-level Emperor realm. In this Blood Justice County, they can be considered as the lowest level of existence. They actually didn't work hard to cultivate, because Zhuowen and Long Tian had concealed most of their aura. Xiao Yu could sense that their auras were equivalent to low-level Emperor realm cultivators. After leaving the Peace Inn, Zhuowen strolled on the streets while Long Tian respectfully followed behind him. Zhuowen and Long Tian strolled around the Blood Justice County for half a day. This time, their speed was obviously much faster than before. After asking around for a long time, Zhuowen and Long Tian didn't manage to obtain any valuable information. In the Blood Justice County, most of the cultivators were at the bottom. Many of them had never even left the blood-refining mansion. It was like a blind man trying to find the way to the Green Lotus Mansion from these people. My lord, ordinary cultivators probably don't know how to get to the Green Lotus Mansion. If we continue like this, we will just be wasting our time. Long Tian said helplessly. It is said that the mansion master of the blood-refining mansion is called Xue Hentian. As the mansion master, I'm afraid he definitely knows the specific way to the Green Lotus Mansion. Zhuowen said as he raised his head. His sharp eyes focused on the center of the Blood Justice County, where a huge blood-red building was located. The blood-red building was shaped like an ancient giant beast. There were many blood-red horns protruding from its surface. It looked quite ferocious. The blood-red building was the mansion of the mansion master of the blood-refining mansion, Shuehentian. In the Blood Justice County, it was a huge building that everyone looked up to. "My lord, are you planning to barge into Shuehentian's mansion?" Long Tien asked in a deep voice with a solemn expression. Although Long Tien didn't know much about the central region, he knew that the mansion masters of the 99 mansions in the central region were all terrifyingly powerful. The strength of Shuehentian, the mansion master of the blood-refining mansion, was considered average among the 99 mansion masters. It was said that his cultivation had reached the heaven-defying saint realm. Moreover, Shuehentian had emerged from countless battles. His strength was much stronger than an ordinary heaven-defying saint realm expert. He wasn't someone that an ordinary heaven-defying saint realm expert could compare with. Although Zhuowen was strong, Long Tien still didn't think that Zhuowen would be a match for Shuehentian. Of course not. How could anyone who can become the lord of a manor be mediocre and simple? Zhuowen said indifferently. "Then my lord," Long Tien said with some doubts, "if you become a general of the blood-refining mansion and become a senior in the blood-refining mansion, you'll be able to enter Shuehentian's mansion. At that time, you should be able to find out some secrets about the Green Lotus mansion," Zhuowen said. Long Tien's eyes lit up. Just as he was about to speak, there was a sudden uproar. Then, dense and orderly footsteps came from the corner ahead. The footsteps were like metal stepping on the ground. It was crisp and pleasing to the ear. There was even a hint of metal in the sound. The cultivators on both sides of the street made way. Soon after, a group of aggressive blood-armored soldiers appeared from the corner. The leader of the group was a brawny man in blood-armored armor. "It's this guy again." Long Tien's eyes focused on the brawny man in blood armor. His expression immediately became somewhat gloomy. He naturally recognized this brawny man in blood armor. He was the captain when they first arrived at the Bloodflow Valley yesterday. "I've finally found you." The brawny man in blood armor's eyes flashed. He laughed heartily as he led the group of blood-armored soldiers in front of Zhuowen and Long Tien. "What's going on? Aren't these the elite soldiers of the Blood General Pavilion? Why have they been brought out? These two are going to be unlucky. I wonder what they've offended the Blood General Pavilion. To think that the Blood General Pavilion would dispatch their elite troops to surround them." The warriors who had originally avoided the two sides of the street began to discuss spiritedly when they saw this scene. Their eyes flickered as they wantonly commented. The Blood General of the Blood General Pavilion was extremely famous in the Blood Jade County. Moreover, this Blood General had defeated the other generals not long after he became a general. His momentum was comparable to the number 1 general and he could be considered an influential figure in the Blood Jade County. The elite troops of the Blood General Pavilion were also extremely easy to identify. Those who wore blood-colored armor were the soldiers of the Blood General Pavilion. Zhuowen's gaze was indifferent as he stared at the brawny man in blood armor and said indifferently, "A good dog doesn't block the way. Don't you know that? Or did I go too easy on you last time and you want to be crippled before you're satisfied?" The brawny man in blood armor's gaze turned cold as he involuntarily took a step back, a look of lingering fear on his face. The scene of him being sent flying by a single punch from the youth in front of him in the Bloodflow Valley was still vivid in his mind. He clearly understood that the youth before him could kill him if he wanted to. However, if he didn't complete the mission given to him by the Blood General, he would probably die. Therefore, after weighing the pros and cons, he said in a deep voice, "Our Blood General Pavilion's master, Lord Blood General, wishes to see you. Is there a need to mobilize so many people just to see me?" Zhuowen said indifferently. "Humph. These are the elite troops of the Blood General Pavilion. Their combined strength is terrifying. Don't think that you're invincible just because you defeated me before. Let me tell you now, you're just a frog at the bottom of a well." The brawny man in blood armor glanced at the elite troops behind him. He seemed to have gained a lot of courage as he spoke in a shaky voice. "Is that so?" Zhuowen smiled and took a step forward. A gust of wind rose from his feet and soared into the sky. Rumble. With one step, dense cracks began to appear on the ground under his feet. These cracks crisscrossed and covered the ground. The brawny man in blood armor narrowed his eyes as he stared at the youth who had taken a step forward. At this moment, the youth's aura had reached an unprecedented level of terror. He felt as if he was not facing a person at this moment, but a lofty mountain that he could only look up to. Crack, crack, crack. Zhuowen suddenly took a second step. His aura was even stronger than before. The cracks on the ground were even more terrifying, almost spreading across the entire street. Thump, thump, thump. Zhuowen took 8 steps forward in a row. His aura rose with each step. When he took the last step, he was already 3 meters away from the brawny man in blood armor. The moment Zhuowen's aura reached its peak, the entire street began to shake violently. Then, the ground completely cracked. The buildings on both sides collapsed into countless pieces. On the street, many cultivators fled like birds startled by the twang of a bow, leaving this street far away. The brawny man in blood armor's legs trembled. He actually knelt on the ground with a plop. Under this terrifying aura, the soldiers behind him could not even straighten their backs. It was as if an extremely heavy mountain was pressing down on them. You. What is your cultivation level? How can you have such a terrifying aura? The brawny man in blood armor cried out in shock. At the same time, he secretly regretted that he had been in such a hurry to find this devil in front of him. He should have waited for the blood general to come before attacking. Chapter 1609. Blood Demon Kneel. Zhuowen's voice was like the might of the heavens as his aura suddenly changed. Like a mountain, it ruthlessly pressed down on the brawny man and the blood-armored soldiers behind him. Plop, plop. The brawny man spat out a mouthful of blood. His legs trembled as he directly knelt on the ground. Naturally, the blood-armored soldiers behind him were not spared as they all knelt on the ground. Hiss, hiss, hiss. This scene caused many of the surrounding cultivators to involuntarily suck in a breath of cold air. The elite troops of the Blood General Pavilion were actually unable to withstand this person's aura and had knelt down. Exactly how terrifying was this person? Long Tian stared at Zhuowen's back. The shock in his heart was no less than the onlookers'. Zhuowen's strength had somewhat exceeded his expectations. You said that the Blood General of the Blood General Pavilion wants to see me? Are you planning to capture me? Zhuowen looked down at the brawny man in blood-armored armor and asked nonchalantly. The brawny man in blood-armored armor lowered his head and maintained his silence. However, he was secretly complaining in his heart. This person was just too powerful. He was probably close to the Blood General of the Blood General Pavilion. Swoosh! A terrifying bloody aura suddenly appeared in the sky above the ruined street. This bloody aura transformed into a huge dragon and swooped down towards Zhuowen. Zhuowen suddenly threw out a punch. Saint energy poured out like a waterfall, causing the surrounding air to flow in reverse and space to shatter. When this punch landed on the dragon, a ring-shaped shockwave erupted, causing the entire street to tremble violently. Zhuowen retreated several feet. With a wave of his sleeve, he dissipated the impact of the collision. He stood up straight as the wind whistled. His long hair and sleeves fluttered in the wind. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed. He lifted his head and saw a man with blood-red hair and eyes in the sky. He was stepping on endless bloody aura as he walked over. The dragon from before was formed by the bloody aura around this man. Its power was extremely terrifying. General. The moment Zhuowen retreated, the terrifying aura on his body completely collapsed. The burly man in blood-red armor and the others naturally regained their freedom. They stood up and stared excitedly at the blood-haired man who was walking through the air. The man with blood-red hair and eyes landed in front of the crimson-armored man and the others. He nodded gently before his gaze landed on Zhuowen and Long Tian. He said indifferently, "The two of you are from the 4 major regions?" Zhuowen stared at the man with red hair and red eyes in a strange manner. He did not answer the man's question directly. Instead, he sighed inwardly, "I didn't expect to meet him in the blood-refining residence. It seems like he returned to the Central Plains." Zhuowen's silence caused the blood-haired, blood-eyed man to be somewhat displeased. He frowned slightly, and just as he was about to attack, his pupils suddenly shrank. He carefully sized up Zhuowen from head to toe, His brows furrowed as he revealed a pondering expression. The two of us are indeed from the 4 major regions. If there's nothing else, we'll be leaving first, Zhuowen said indifferently. He planned to leave with Long Tian. Wait. The crimson-haired man suddenly called out to Zhuowen, and Zhuowen turned to the crimson-haired man and said, "May I know what advice you have for me, General?" A wisp of a smile appeared on the corners of the man's mouth. "Brother, why don't you make a trip to my Blood General Pavilion? There are some things that I would like to ask you. Of course, it's to convince you of my sincerity." With that, the man grinned. He reached out with his right hand and grabbed the crimson-armored man behind him. "General, wait. What are you doing?" The crimson-armored man did not expect the man to make a move. He could not help screaming and struggling. Crack! The crimson-haired man smiled cruelly as he exerted force with his right hand. Instantly, the crimson-armored man let out a shrill cry as he exploded into a bloody mist under the enormous force of the crimson-haired man. The blood mist was sucked into the crimson-haired man's body like a magnet. The crimson-haired man revealed a look of enjoyment. This scene shocked many of the surrounding warriors. Their bodies trembled, and some of them even hid far away in fear. The Blood General was well known in the Blood Azure County. He was ruthless to both his own people and his enemies. The elite troops behind the Blood General's pavilion all looked calm, as if they were used to the Blood General's ruthless behavior. "Take this as an apology to you, brother. Now that I'm sincere enough, I wonder if you can be as sincere as me?" The Blood General grinned. Zhuowen smiled and said, "Since the Blood General is so enthusiastic, I won't spoil the fun. Haha. Brother, you're really straightforward. Come with me." The Blood General laughed and waved his right hand. The crimson-armored soldiers behind him retreated, and the Blood General made an inviting gesture to Zhuowen. Zhuowen smiled and followed quietly with Long Tian. "That's terrifying. Who are these two people? How could they make the Blood General treat them so politely? The Blood General should be so courteous because of the young man's strength. Just now, the young man's aura alone caused the entire street to collapse. He must be at least a profound sage or above to be able to do that." When Zhuowen left with the Blood General, the warriors who were hiding far away all rushed back to the street that had already turned into ruins, sighing endlessly. A girl in adult clothes ran all the way and landed at the edge of the ruined street. She was immediately dumbfounded. Just now, she had been attracted by the terrible sound of destruction and hurried over from the door of the inn out of curiosity. The whole street collapsed in an instant. What kind of destructive power could do that? After all, the buildings in the Blood Azure County were not built with ordinary bricks and tiles. These buildings were extremely tough. Even the girl, who was at the peak of the mid-level martial emperor realm, could not destroy one of the bricks and tiles even if she used all her strength. The strength of the zombie-faced young man is so terrifying. Just his momentum alone destroyed the whole street. If I had such strength, I'm afraid I would also be treated politely by the famous Blood General. The girl heard the discussion around her. She was shocked and thought of the two people who had walked out. Didn't one of them have a zombie-faced face? Could it be him? The girl was a little absent-minded. She immediately shook her head and said, "Impossible. If that person is really so strong, how could he take a fancy to the Peace Inn? I thought too much." Thinking of this, the girl laughed at herself and left the street. But when she left, she looked at the ruined street from time to time, her beautiful eyes full of envy and desire. How great would it be if she could possess such power? That way, she might be able to avenge her parents. In the Blood General Pavilion, in a rather secluded pavilion, the Blood General looked into the distance with his hands behind his back, not saying a word. Zhuowen stood quietly behind him with Long Tian, looking at the Blood General in front of him calmly. After a long time, the Blood General slowly turned around. He looked at Zhuowen and said with a grin, "Brother Zhuo, I haven't seen you for many years. Your cultivation has advanced to such a level. It really surprises me." Zhuowen narrowed his eyes and said indifferently, "How did you recognize me?" The Blood General laughed and said, "It seems that you are indeed Brother Zhuo. As for how I recognized you, it's mainly because of your aura. Although your aura is very hidden, I can still recognize it. After all, we have been together day and night. Apart from your dragon soul, I am the most familiar with your aura. Long Tian looked at the Blood General and Zhuowen in surprise. He didn't expect them to be old acquaintances. From their conversation, he could tell that they had known each other for a long time. Zhuowen pondered for a moment and said indifferently, I see. No wonder you could recognize me. However, I didn't expect you to come to the central region and become a general of the blood refining mansion after leaving the demon sealing green coffin. Am I right, blood demon? I was originally a creature of the central region and was once a member of the blood refining mansion. After you let me go, I followed the route back then and found the teleportation point of the blood refining mansion. Finally, I came to the blood refining mansion. If I didn't have the contact information of a few old guys, I'm afraid my cultivation wouldn't have recovered so quickly. The blood demon grinned. Zhuowen looked serious. At this moment, the blood demon's aura was many times stronger than before. His aura had reached the level of the Sun Sky Saint realm. Moreover, the blood demon was an ancient saint-level creature. His battle strength was naturally much stronger than warriors of the same level. If Zhuowen were to deal with the blood demon, he would need to use his body, which cultivated the physique, to suppress the blood demon in front of him. You should have recognized me after seeing me, right? You must have invited me to your blood general pavilion for a reason, right? Speak, Zhuowen said indifferently. The blood demon chuckled and said, I like to cooperate with smart people. Speaking of this, the blood demon's eyes turned serious and he continued, I don't know if you know the hierarchy of the blood refining mansion. The blood refining mansion is divided into 4 levels. The first level is the mansion master of the blood refining mansion, Shui Hentian. He is the strongest person in the blood refining mansion. His cultivation has reached the peak of the heaven-defying saint realm. More importantly, he has an immortal saint weapon. Therefore, although he has not reached the immortal saint realm, he can occupy the position of the mansion master. Zhuowen was shocked and said, Shui Hentian has an immortal saint weapon? The blood demon cast a sidelong glance at Zhuowen and said indifferently, Immortal saint weapons are also divided into 3 levels. They are earthly immortal saint weapons, heavenly immortal saint weapons, and true immortal saint weapons. Chapter 16:10. Blood refining divine pond earthly immortal saint weapon? Zhuowen was shocked. No wonder Shui Hentian could become the mansion master of blood refining mansion when he was only at the heaven-defying saint stage. He had an earthly immortal saint weapon. A celestial saint weapon was much more terrifying than a ascended saint weapon. Although Shui Hentian was not a celestial saint and could not unleash the full power of an earthly immortal saint weapon, it was still much more terrifying than a ascended saint weapon. The second level is the commander-in-chief. He holds the commander-in-chief's seal and controls dozens of counties and millions of troops. The third level is the general, which is my current position. A general can only control a county and hundreds of thousands of troops. He has to listen to the commander-in-chief's orders. I'm the general in the third level. The fourth level is the commander-in-chief. The commander-in-chief is the general's deputy. He can control tens of thousands of troops under the general's command, but he has to obey the general's orders. When he spoke up to hear, the blood devil stared at Zhuowen with blazing eyes and said, Brother Zhuo, I can sense that even though your cultivation is only at the shattering saint realm, your strength is definitely above your cultivation. If I'm not wrong, your strength is comparable to the heavenly yin saint realm, right? Zhuowen smiled. He did not admit or deny it. Shui Mo did not care about Zhuowen's attitude and continued, the previous battle to conquer the nearby prefectures was extremely tragic. It resulted in the death of 2 lower-ranked commander-in-chief. This time, Mansion Master Shui Hentian has issued an edict to summon all the generals and commander-in-chief of Blood Refining Mansion to Blood Jade County. He plans to choose 2 new commander-in-chief to fill the 2 vacant commander-in-chief's positions. At this point, Bloodseeker stared at Zhuowen with a burning gaze. Zhuowen narrowed his eyes. Since Shui Mo had said so much, how could he not know what Shui Mo was planning? Perhaps, Shui Mo wanted Zhuowen to help him fight for the commander-in-chief's position. Zhuowen looked at Shui Mo quietly and did not say a word. The blood demon smiled and said, Brother Zhuo, don't worry. If you help me this time, I won't mistreat you. You probably don't know this, but the people from the Icefire family are also looking for you. It seems like the one who gave the order is the Icefire family's young master, Jiang Binhan. Hearing this, Zhuowen's gaze turned frosty. That Icefire family's young lord was indeed searching for his whereabouts. Luckily, he had already used the 100 transformations technique to change his appearance before entering the 9 Nether Grand Array. Otherwise, he would have been targeted by the Icefire family the moment he entered the blood-refining mansion. Are you going to use this to threaten me? Zhuowen said in a deep voice as he stared at the blood demon with killing intent in his eyes. Looking at the killing intent in Zhuowen's eyes, Bloodseeker's body trembled. He didn't know why, but when he saw Zhuowen's eyes that were filled with killing intent, he felt his heart tremble. Although Zhuowen has a lot of trump cards, his cultivation level is too low. I was actually scared by his gaze. The blood demon shook his head and thought to himself. After regaining his senses, the blood demon shook his head and said, "Brother Zhuo, you're wrong. We've been through life and death together. How can I betray you because of this? After all, I really do need your help. Do you think I'll harm my helper? Moreover, if I obtain the position of commander, I'll be able to enter the blood-refining deity pond once. I can even bring my helper along." Blood-refining deity pond? Zhuowen asked doubtfully. The blood demon explained patiently. The blood-refining deity pond is a place where Shuehentian bathes. However, don't underestimate the blood-refining deity pond. The blood-refining deity pond is filled with surging blood energy. This blood energy can be absorbed and transformed into saint energy. I see that your cultivation level has reached the shattering profound saint realm. If you can enter the blood-refining deity pond, you can at least reach the peak of the shattering profound saint realm. If you have an epiphany, I'm afraid you can naturally advance to the heavenly saint realm. Zhuowen was shocked and asked, "Does the blood-refining deity pond really have such a powerful effect?" Of course. In the blood-refining mansion, there are a total of 8 commanders. The weakest of the 8 commanders is at the peak of the Yang Sky Saint realm, and the strongest has reached the heaven-defying saint realm. They're almost on par with Shuehentian. These 8 commanders had soaked in the blood-refining deity pond before, so their cultivation level was extremely fast. In the end, they reached their current level. Do you think the blood-refining deity pond's effect is great? The blood demon's eyes were blazing. It was obvious that he also yearned for the blood-refining deity pond. Looking at the blood demon's expression, Zhuowen knew that the blood demon was not lying. This made him a little tempted, but he could not completely trust the blood demon. After all, the blood demon was not a kind person. Therefore, Zhuowen was still secretly on guard. Of course, if you choose to stay in the blood-refining mansion, I can ask the mansion master to grant you the position of a general and control the military power of a county. What do you think? The blood demon asked. Zhuowen shook his head and said, "There's no need for that. My purpose in coming to the central region is not the blood-refining mansion, but the Green Lotus mansion. Moreover, I have other matters to attend to. It's impossible for me to stay in the blood-refining mansion. Since you're from the central region, you should know how to get to the Green Lotus mansion from the blood-refining mansion, right?" As he spoke, Zhuowen looked at the blood demon. The blood demon nodded and said in a deep voice, "I do know about this. However, the relationship between the blood-refining mansion and the Green Lotus mansion is not good. There is no teleportation array between the 2 mansions. Therefore, if you want to go to the Green Lotus mansion, you will have to cross the mansions." The blood demon waved his sleeve and handed the jade slip to Zhuowen. He said, "This jade slip records the route from the blood-refining mansion to the Green Lotus mansion. You just need to follow the route. However, the distance between the 2 mansions is not small. It's much farther than the 4 mansions. If you rely on yourself, I'm afraid it will take you a long time. I suggest that you ride the Chaos Beast to the Green Lotus mansion. However, it will be extremely expensive for you." After checking the jade slip, Zhuowen put it away and asked in astonishment, "Chaos Beast? What's that?" The Chaos Beast is a kind of strange beast bred by the Chaos Temple. This strange beast is born with the law of space. However, It is docile and does not take the initiative to attack. It is extremely fast. The Chaos Temple specializes in breeding these chaos beasts. They are used as mounts to cross the mansions. There are stations for these chaos beasts in every mansions. As long as you buy a ticket, you will be able to enter the chaos beast and travel to other mansions. If I'm not wrong, with the speed of the chaos beast, it will only take 2 months to travel from the Blood Refining Mansion to the Green Lotus Mansion. The price of the ticket is also very expensive. I'm afraid you will have to pay the price of a sacred artifact of Yin Sky. The Blood Demon explained to Zhuowen in detail about the Chaos Beast. This gave Zhuowen a better understanding of the Chaos Beast. However, the price of the ticket really shocked Zhuowen. The price of a ticket was actually comparable to a saint artifact of the sky of Yintian. Wasn't this a little too exaggerated? The Blood Demon had already expected Zhuowen to be surprised. He said indifferently, "Brother Zhuo, you don't have to be so surprised. You should have seen the route in the Jade Slip. Although your speed is fast, it will take you at least 10 years to travel such a long distance even if you use the law of space with all your strength. This is under the condition that you are working day and night. If you have to rest during this period, I'm afraid that even 10 years won't be enough." Hearing this, Zhuowen was silent for a moment. In the end, he nodded and said, "I know. Since Brother Blood Demon can tell me this, I am very grateful." "Hey, Brother Zhuo, you are being too serious. Given our relationship, as long as Brother Zhuo can help me win the position of commander, I will pay the fare to the Green Lotus Mansion for you. I will also let Brother Zhuo enter the Blood Refinement Divine Pond," the Blood Demon said in a forthright manner. Zhuowen smiled slightly, but his heart was cold. He knew that the Blood Demon would not be so kind. How could he pay the fare for him? However, the Blood Refinement Divine Pond was indeed very tempting to Zhuowen. Brother Blood Demon's kindness is difficult to decline. I naturally have no reason to refuse. Also, I hope that Brother Blood Demon will remember your promise, Zhuowen said meaningfully. The Blood Demon laughed heartily and said, "Of course. By the way, the commander battle will begin in 7 days. At that time, the other generals will also bring their helpers. I hope that Brother Zhuo can make a trip to my Blood General Pavilion. At that time, we will enter the Blood Refinement Mansion together." Zhuowen nodded. The Blood Refinement Mansion was the core area of the Blood Refinement Mansion. It was also a huge mansion where Shui Hentian was located. "Then I will take my leave first. We will meet again in 7 days." After speaking, Zhuowen turned and left the hall. The Blood Demon's eyes slowly narrowed. After Zhuowen left, the Blood Demon sneered and said, "Zhuowen, oh Zhuowen, I really did not expect that I, Blood Demon, would be so lucky to meet you in the Blood Refinement Mansion. If it were not for the fact that you are still of great use, I am afraid that I would have already reported this to the Icefire family. However, now is not the time. You still have to be my scapegoat in the commander battle. You have many uses, so you cannot die yet." After speaking, the Blood Demon entered the depths of the pavilion. The originally quiet pavilion was suddenly filled with a strange smell of blood. Zhuowen, the Blood Demon is not a good person. Cooperating with him is no different from asking a tiger for its skin. On the street, Xiao Hei's voice slowly resounded in Zhuowen's mind. "I naturally know about this. However, the Blood Refinement Divine Pond that the Blood Demon mentioned is very attractive to me. That thing can at least raise my cultivation to the peak of the fragmented profound saint realm. I must enter the Blood Refinement Divine Pond at least once. Of course, if the Blood Demon really has bad intentions, I don't mind killing him." Zhuowen's eyes lit up. He was very clear that if he cultivated like this, it would take him nearly 1,000 years to reach the peak of the fragmented profound saint realm. Although there were still some immortal pills in the Azure Dragon Hall, only the supreme-grade immortal pills were useful to him now. However, supreme-grade immortal pills were rare in the Azure Dragon Hall. Moreover, Zhuowen had consumed a lot of supreme-grade immortal pills. He had a certain resistance to the medicinal properties of supreme-grade immortal pills. Therefore, the effects of the supreme-grade immortal pills were getting worse and worse for him. Chapter 1611. A dream of eternity. After returning to the inn, Xiao Yu, who was seated cross-legged at the entrance, suddenly stopped Zhuowen and Long Tian. Do you know about the destruction of the nearby streets? Xiao Yu's tone was slightly excited, and at the same time, she asked with a slightly perturbed tone. Zhuowen was stunned, and then he asked with a puzzled expression, the destruction of the streets? I don't know about that, but when I was strolling around with Long Tian, I really did hear a rather loud noise. Could it be that there was a huge battle nearby? Xiao Yu's beautiful eyes dimmed, and then she waved her hand and said, since you don't know about it, then forget it. It's said that the destruction of the streets was caused by an extremely powerful young man. Merely the aura that the young man emanated was able to suppress the elites of the Blood General Pavilion to the point they knelt on the ground. It would be great if I possessed that person's strength, then I would be able to replace my father. Xiao Yu became extremely excited when she spoke about that young man, but she suddenly stopped here as if there was something that was difficult to mention. Zhuowen was naturally sharp enough to notice Xiao Yu's slip of the tongue, but he didn't take it to heart. He smiled and said, "You're so hardworking, and your talent isn't bad. One day, you'll be able to be like that person." "No. It's impossible for me to be like that person. That person is too strong, so strong that even I feel that I'm unable to reach him." Xiao Yu spoke in a slightly dejected manner. Zhuowen suddenly patted Xiao Yu on the shoulder and said with a smile, "Where there's a will, there's a way. There's nothing in this world that's impossible. The reason you can't do it is because you don't have the confidence, and you haven't taken the first step to truly take action. If you want to succeed, then you have to be down to earth and take it step by step. Don't bite off more than you can chew, because that will only lead to failure in the end." After he finished speaking, Zhuowen led Long Tian into the inn, and only Xiao Yu was left staring blankly at Zhuowen's back as a trace of an indescribable feeling arose in her heart. After returning to his room, Zhuowen sat cross-legged in the room. In order to prevent others from disturbing him, Zhuowen set up layers of restrictions in the room. 3 days later, Zhuowen, who had been sitting cross-legged, suddenly opened his eyes. A yellow light burst out from between his eyebrows, and then the old fox Cheng Huang proudly appeared in front of Zhuowen with a porcelain bottle in hand. "Zhuowen, I've already refined the golden lightning body tempering slurry. Take it." As Cheng Huang spoke, it tossed its little paw and the porcelain bottle floated above Zhuowen's palm. Zhuowen slowly opened the cork. Suddenly, a bolt of golden lightning shot into the sky. The golden lightning was accompanied by the golden liquid, which transformed into a lightning dragon in midair. As soon as the lightning dragon appeared, it roared and charged towards Zhuowen. Waves of dragon roars resounded in his ears. "Bastard!" Zhuowen's gaze was cold. His right hand formed into a claw and suddenly clenched. The lightning dragon that was formed by the golden lightning body tempering slurry was directly grabbed by his hand. No matter how much the lightning dragon roared, it was unable to break free from Zhuowen's claw. Zhuowen squeezed his right hand, and the lightning dragon collapsed. It turned back into the golden liquid and flowed into the porcelain bottle. Then, Zhuowen waved his sleeve, and a clone appeared in front of him. This clone was naturally the clone formed by the Great Success Saint body. Its appearance was almost exactly the same as Zhuowen's. The only difference was that there was a faint golden light flickering on its body. It looked much more dazzling than Zhuowen's original body. Use this golden lightning body tempering slurry to refine your physique. Perhaps you can raise your Great Success Saint body to a higher level. Zhuowen threw the porcelain bottle to the clone, and the clone meticulously received it. Then, it followed Zhuowen's instructions and sat cross-legged in the corner of the room. It planned to use the golden lightning body tempering slurry in the porcelain bottle. The original body and the clone cultivated at the same time, and 4 days quietly passed. On the night of the 7th day, dark clouds covered the sky. The dark clouds lingered in the sky like a huge black dragon. On the roof of the Peace Inn, a dark shadow flickered. Whoosh! The dark shadow's body was as light as smoke. As it flickered, it did not even cause the slightest sound of wind. It was as if it was a real shadow. Suddenly, the dark shadow stopped on the eaves on the left side. He bent his body and reached down with his right hand. Then, he gently lifted a tile. The dark shadow took out a jade-colored tube from his bosom. A wisp of invisible gas gushed out from the tube's opening. The gas spread out at an extremely fast speed. It was like a snake that instantly filled every room in the Peace Inn. In an instant, in the guest rooms of the Peace Inn, almost all the cultivators felt dizzy. Then, they fell unconscious. In a brightly lit room, Xiao Yu sat cross-legged on the bed. She slowly breathed and cultivated. She did not waste any time that could be used to cultivate. My head. Why do I feel dizzy all of a sudden? Xiao Yu slowly opened her eyes. She raised her right hand and pressed it against her forehead as she muttered softly. However, she quickly realized something and quickly held her breath. Her beautiful eyes scanned the surroundings with vigilance. Her cultivation had reached the 6th level Emperor realm. She was very clear that if she did not want to sleep, she could completely suppress the drowsiness. But now, the drowsiness was like a maggot that lingered in her mind. It was impossible to get rid of it. It seemed that she could completely fall asleep at any time under the drowsiness. With her keen intuition, she immediately realized that something was wrong. Therefore, she immediately held her breath. Your vigilance is not bad. You actually managed to smell the difference in my dream of eternity incense. A sinister voice suddenly rang out in Xiao Yu's room. Xiao Yu was startled. She gloomily discovered that a slender figure was slowly walking towards her. This person was dressed in black and his face was covered with a black cloth. Only a pair of sinister eyes could be seen. He coldly stared at Xiao Yu, who was sitting cross-legged on the bed. Step by step, he walked towards her. His gaze was like a cat that was playing with a mouse. He was very clear that although Xiao Yu had noticed that something was wrong and held her breath, she had still inhaled a small portion of the dream of eternity incense. At this moment, she was probably powerless and unable to resist. Who are you? Why did you put the sleeping incense in our Peace Inn? Xiao Yu forcefully calmed herself down and asked. The black-clothed man laughed coldly and didn't answer Xiao Yu's question. He slowly walked in front of Xiao Yu and with a flick of his right hand, he tore Xiao Yu's outer clothes into pieces, revealing her pink undergarment and her snow-white shoulders. Such a beautiful scene was enough to make many men's blood boil. Ah! Xiao Yu screamed. Her beautiful eyes were filled with shame and anger as she stared at the black-clothed man in front of her. The black-clothed man did not have any lewd look in his eyes. He placed his right hand on Xiao Yu's shoulder and a thread of saint energy entered Xiao Yu's body. Poochie. Xiao Yu spat out a mouthful of blood. Her beautiful face was pale and bloodless. She stared at the black-clothed man in front of her with shame and anger. The black-clothed man did not pay any attention to Xiao Yu. Instead, he continued to pour saint energy into Xiao Yu's body. So hot. Suddenly, Xiao Yu's face flushed red. She could not help but moan. Soon after, a fiery red mark appeared on her collarbone. If one were to look at it carefully, this fiery red mark was like 9 suns. It was arranged in a specific path. As expected, you have the 9 suns physique. Sir Manager's guess was accurate. You are indeed the descendant of the 9 suns heavenly monarch. Ha ha, the heavens reward those who persevere. The black-clothed man laughed heartily. His right hand moved as he wanted to grab Xiao Yu's neck and take her away. Boom. However, just as the black-clothed man was about to grab Xiao Yu, the floor beneath his feet suddenly collapsed. Soon after, a skinny claw grabbed the black-clothed man's right leg and pulled him down. The black-clothed man was caught off guard and was pulled down by the claw. Fortunately, most of the people in the Peace Inn had been knocked out by the dream of an eternity. Therefore, it did not cause much of a commotion. Boom. The black-clothed man reacted quickly. He threw out a punch and forced the owner of the skinny claw back. The black-clothed man took a few steps back and stared coldly at the old man in front of him. He said, "It seems like you are also a remnant of the 9 Suns Heavenly Monarchs faction. I did not expect that you would dare to open an inn in the Bloodjade County. It was really difficult for us to find you. Who are you? Who sent you here? Could it be Shui Hentian?" Opposite the black-clothed man was a white-haired old man. He was Xiao Yu's grandfather and the shopkeeper of the Peace Inn. At this moment, the white-haired old man's face was extremely solemn. Hehe, the mansion master does not know about this. It was the head steward who sent me to test her. I did not expect that the little girl really has the 9 sons constitution. You are all remnants of the 9 sons heavenly monarchs faction. You are all finished. The black-clothed man sneered. The white-haired old man's eyes were gloomy. After he checked Xiao Yu's room and found that she was fine, he heaved a sigh of relief. You are really despicable. You actually used sleeping incense in my inn, the white-haired old man said coldly. Hehe, don't you know that the one who strikes first has the advantage? Moreover, I know that you have also been poisoned by the dream of an eternity. How much strength can you use now? The black-clothed man sneered. The white-haired old man's eyes were gloomy. He said coldly, it is enough to deal with you. Haha, what a joke. The black-clothed man raised his head and laughed. His eyes instantly became gloomy and cold. Then, he disappeared on the spot like a puff of green smoke. When he appeared again, he was still in front of the white-haired old man. His hand was extremely fast and it was like lightning. In an instant, his hand imprinted on the white-haired old man's chest. The white-haired old man roared and pushed out his right hand. Terrifying saint power was pushed out and he wanted to block the black-clothed man's attack. Poochie. Unfortunately, the white-haired old man, who had been drugged by the sleeping incense, was at a disadvantage. The instant he blocked the black-clothed man's attack, his defense crumbled inch by inch. That open hand imprinted itself on the old man's chest unimpeded. The old man spat out a mouthful of blood and was sent flying. The direction that the white-haired old man was sent flying was coincidentally the room that Zhuoan was staying in. Grandfather. Xiao Yu's beautiful eyes were shocked and she could not help but scream. Rumble. The white-haired old man smashed into the floor above, passing through it and landing in a room. Chapter 1612. A drop of yellow spring poochie. The white-haired old man spat out a mouthful of blood as his entire body trembled. He wanted to stand up, but due to his heavy injuries and the effect of the dream of eternity, he no longer had the strength to fight. Hehe, old fart, you've been hit by the dream of eternity and now you've even received my full strength attack. Even if your cultivation has reached the profound glimpse saint realm, you're already an arrow at the end of its flight. You're not my opponent at all. The black-clothed man laughed nastily as he took a step forward. His speed was as fast as lightning as he charged towards the white-haired old man. No. Grandfather. Xiao Yu's face was filled with tears as she clenched her fists tightly. However, due to the knockout incense, she couldn't move at all. She could only watch as the black-clothed man got closer and closer to the white-haired old man. At this moment, Xiao Yu hated herself for being weak more and more. If she had powerful strength, she wouldn't have been hit by the dream of eternity and wouldn't be like this, where she could only watch her grandfather fight in front of her while she was powerless to do anything. The white-haired old man barely propped himself up. The veins on his face bulged as beads of sweat dripped down from his forehead. It was as if he was enduring unbearable pain. However, he soon discovered that there was someone else in the room. Furthermore, this person wasn't affected by the dream of eternity and had fainted. Instead, he was full of energy. The white-haired old man stared at Zhuoan, who had stood up from the bed, in astonishment and couldn't help but exclaim, "Guest, it's you?" However, the white-haired old man soon saw another figure in the room. This figure's entire body was covered in golden veins that overflowed with golden light. It was like the sun, extremely blazing and dazzling. Moreover, this figure's appearance was exactly the same as Zhuoan, who was sitting cross-legged on the bed. Without a doubt, this golden figure was probably this person's external incarnation. Moreover, what made the white-haired old man even more astonished was that this guest who had stayed in a few days ago wasn't affected by the dream of eternity at all. Zhuoan waved his sleeve and kept his external incarnation into the Azure Dragon Hall. However, his gaze was extremely gloomy. Earlier, he was meditating, and he had set up a powerful restriction around the room, so he was fully immersed in his cultivation and did not deliberately sense the outside world. Yet now, the battle between the white-haired old man and the black-robed man had directly broken through his seals, rousing him from his cultivation state. His clones had been completely exposed as well. This had crossed his bottom line. Although Zhuowen appeared to be rather calm on the surface, his heart was erupting with fury like a volcano. He, 9 suns heavenly venerates remnants, die. Once I'm done with you, I'll bring back that little girl with the bloodline of the 9 suns heavenly monarch. That'll be a great merit. At this moment, the black-clothed man's speed was as fast as lightning. He instantly swept into Zhuowen's room. Although he had also noticed Zhuowen who had stood up, the black-clothed man's speed was as fast as lightning. Although the black-clothed man was rather surprised that this person had not been affected by the dream of an eternity, the aura on Zhuowen's body was not strong, so he did not pay too much attention to it. Once he was done with the white-haired old man, he would deal with this guy who didn't know what was good for him. At this thought, the black-clothed man's speed increased. His right hand was like a poisonous snake as it cut through the void and turned into a knife hand. Instantly, a sharp and terrifying knife chi erupted from his knife hand, intending to completely bury the white-haired old man. The white-haired old man's expression changed slightly. He clenched his right hand and was about to use a desperate move when a slender figure slowly walked in front of him. "Dear guest, you." The white-haired old man was rather stunned. The black-clothed man also saw the young man in front of the white-haired old man. His gaze was extremely dark as he coldly said, "Ungrateful fellow, you actually dare to stop me from killing someone. You are simply courting death. Fine, I'll kill you first and take that old man's life later." Whoosh. The black-clothed man's momentum did not diminish. His knife hand instantly swept over, aiming at Zhuowen's heart and violently drilling into it. However, when the knife hand was just a few inches away from Zhuowen's heart, the black-clothed man was stunned to find that his knife hand could no longer move forward. This was because Zhuowen's right hand had reached out and firmly grasped his own right hand. This hand was like an iron hoop that firmly grasped his right hand, making it impossible for him to move even if he wanted to. "What? Let go of me." The black-clothed man roared loudly as the saint energy in his body gushed out. This black-clothed man's saint energy contained the law of wind. Gusts of wind roared and formed a cyclone that directly attacked Zhuowen. Unfortunately, the moment the black-clothed man's saint energy gushed out, it was violently twisted by Zhuowen. The saint energy that swept out was immediately annihilated by the intense pain. Catcher. Zhuowen showed no mercy. With a rip of his right hand, a majestic saint energy that was like a mountain crushed down. Suddenly, the black-clothed man's right hand was directly torn off. Blood spurted out like a torrential rain, splattering all over the sky. "Ah!" The black-clothed man cried out in agony as he retreated, trying to escape from this place. However, Zhuowen's speed was much faster than him. His right hand reached out and grabbed the black-clothed man's neck from behind. With a violent swing, the black-clothed man was ruthlessly thrown onto the ground like a piece of trash. Boom! The black-clothed man was directly embedded into the ground tens of meters deep. A mouthful of blood spurted out from his mouth. The meridians in his body were all ruptured by Zhuowen's saint energy, leaving him with only a single breath left. All of this happened in an instant. Before the white-haired old man and Xiao Yu could even react, the black-clothed man who was full of vigor was beaten by Zhuowen to the point that he could not even fight back. The white-haired old man's body trembled as he looked at Zhuowen's back. His eyes were filled with fear and dread. The black-clothed man's cultivation was similar to his, at the glimpse profound saint realm. Even if the white-haired old man was not hit by the eternal dream, he might not be able to defeat the black-clothed man. However, this guest who had just moved in not long ago was able to beat the black-clothed man to the brink of death in just a few breaths of time. What kind of strength did he need to achieve this? Moreover, the white-haired old man could not help but think of the external incarnation that he had seen in the room earlier that was covered with golden veins. He could feel that the strange external incarnation gave him a sense of crisis that was even more terrifying than the young man in front of him. At this moment, the zombie-faced young man in front of him seemed rather mysterious in the eyes of the white-haired old man. So strong. Through the gap in the room, Xiao Yu had also seen the battle just now. After she came back to her senses, her beautiful eyes glowed as she stared at Zhuowen's back. "Sir, this subordinate is useless. I was hit by the sleeping incense." At this moment, Long Tian staggered out of the room. His footsteps were weak, his body was weak, and his face was filled with shame. It's okay. The sleeping incense's effect has a certain limit. Go back and rest well. The effects of the medicine should be gone by tomorrow, Zhuowen said as he took a step forward. With a suction force from his right hand, the black-clothed man embedded more than 10 meters deep in the ground was suddenly pulled out by him. Who sent you? Why did you disturb my cultivation? Zhuowen said coldly. The mask on the black-clothed man's face had already fallen off. He stared at Zhuowen in front of him and repeatedly shook his head. Sir, please spare my life. This subordinate's target was not you. This subordinate's target was the old man and the girl. The one who disturbed your cultivation was that old man. He was the one who broke into your room and disturbed your peace. At this moment, the black-clothed man was complaining incessantly. If he knew that such a fiend was staying in the Peace Inn, he would not have dared to enter the inn alone. In fact, the black-clothed man couldn't be blamed. The Peace Inn was the cheapest inn in the Blood Jade County. The cultivators who stayed there were mostly at the bottom of the Blood Jade County. It was impossible for there to be any powerful cultivators. This was also the reason why the black-clothed man was so fearless and came to the Peace Inn alone to test Xiao Yu's strength. If he knew that there was such a strong expert like Zhuowen in the Peace Inn, he would rather die than come here alone. Bullshit, if it wasn't for you, would I have disturbed this, sir? The white-haired old man's expression changed slightly and he could not help but angrily shout. Zhuowen's expression did not change as he coldly stared at the black-clothed man. A burst of murderous intent burst out, causing the black-clothed man's hair to stand on end. The black-clothed man was silent for a moment before he said in a deep voice, Sir, let me live and I will tell you the purpose of my visit. You are not qualified to bargain in front of me. Zhuowen's eyes revealed an impatient expression as he stretched out his right hand. Suddenly, a huge yellow spring shadow gushed out from the void behind him. The yellow spring shadow instantly engulfed the black-clothed man. The black-clothed man's body trembled and twitched continuously. In the end, his body shriveled up and turned into a shriveled corpse. The yellow spring shadow swept over and disappeared into the void. On Zhuowen's palm, there was a drop of yellow liquid floating. This drop of liquid contained a dense death intent. Within this death intent, it was as if life and death were alternating in this drop of liquid, forming a balance as if it was a reincarnation cycle. Legend has it that the yellow spring was a river in the depths of the nether world. The yellow spring could cross one's life and death. It contained the truth of reincarnation. There was a different kind of balance between life and death. Controlling the yellow spring meant that one could live or die. In between life and death, one could become the supreme ruler. Just now, Zhuowen used the yellow spring shadow from the slaughtering finger of yellow spring to kill the black-clothed man. He used the black-clothed man's energy to form this drop of yellow spring. So that's how it is. By using the slaughtering finger of yellow spring to kill people, one can refine them into the yellow spring. If one has committed grave sins, does it mean that one can obtain more yellow spring droplets? Zhuowen licked his lips as his eyes revealed a hint of excitement. He finally knew why the slaughtering finger of yellow spring had such a low threshold as an immortal art. The purpose of this immortal art was to let you kill and cultivate more yellow spring droplets. If a yellow spring was formed in the end, the power of this immortal art would probably shock the entire world. Of course, this path was naturally filled with uncertainty. After all, killing a person only allowed one drop of yellow spring to be formed. To form a huge yellow spring, how many lives would it take? Chapter 16:13. The tallest tree in the forest would be destroyed by the wind. Looking at the corpse of the black-clothed man, the white-haired old man and Xiao Yu were both startled and terrified. The young man in front of them acted decisively. His vicious and merciless way of doing things had completely shocked the two of them. The white-haired old man cried bitterly in his heart. He didn't expect this young man to be such a vicious and merciless fiend. If this young man wanted to kill him and his grandson, he would only need to move his finger. Just as the white-haired old man was on tenterhooks, Zhuowen turned his head and said to the white-haired old man, "Shopkeeper, prepare another room for me. I can't stay in this room anymore." The The white-haired old man was startled, but soon after, his eyes were filled with ecstasy. He quickly replied, "Sir is right. This old man will prepare a new room for you." The meaning of Zhuowen's words was very clear. He didn't want to pursue the responsibility. Moreover, after seeing Zhuowen's powerful strength, the white-haired old man worked especially hard. Although he was drugged, he was still a glimpse profound saint. His basic movements weren't a problem at all. After preparing a new room, the white-haired old man was about to leave to check on Xiao Yu's situation, but he was stopped by Zhuowen. The white-haired old man didn't dare to neglect and asked, "May I know what Sir wants? Who is the 9 Suns' heavenly monarch? What relationship do you and Xiao Yu have with the former? Also, who is the black-clothed man below? Why did he come to kill you?" Zhuowen sat on the bed and stared at the white-haired old man as he spoke unhurriedly. The white-haired old man's face stiffened, and he revealed a hesitant expression. "If you don't want to follow in the footsteps of the black-clothed man, you'd better answer my question truthfully." A murderous intent instantly locked onto the white-haired old man, causing him to tremble. In the end, the white-haired old man gritted his teeth and said, "Sir, there's no harm in telling you this. After all, you killed the black-clothed man. Xiao Yu and I can't stay here any longer." That black-clothed man was sent by the blood-refining manor's head steward, Kang Feng. His purpose was to test whether Xiao Yu has a 9-yang constitution. Furthermore, Xiao Yu's 9-yang physique has been discovered. Now that the black-clothed man has been killed today, the head steward of the blood-refining manor, Kang Feng, will likely place his suspicions on the Peace Inn. After tonight, I plan to dismiss the Peace Inn. Speaking up to here, the white-haired old man sighed inwardly. He and Xiao Yu had kept a low profile in the Bloodjade County for over 10 years, but in the end, they were still discovered by the people of the blood-refining mansion. Zhuowen did not say a word. He silently looked at the white-haired old man, waiting for him to continue. The white-haired elder pondered for a moment before continuing. "The 9 Suns' heavenly monarch is this old man's master and also the previous manor lord of the blood refinement manor. Shui Hentian is merely a servant of the heavenly monarch. However, this dog servant, Shui Hentian, was exceptionally talented and was highly regarded by the heavenly monarch. Later on, the heavenly monarch went on an expedition to other prefectures and was heavily injured. He had no choice but to go into seclusion when he returned. However, Shui Hentian plotted a rebellion and actually ambushed the heavily injured heavenly monarch. In the end, the heavenly monarch fell. In order to ascend to the position of manor lord, Shui Hentian colluded with the other commanders of the blood-refining manor to force the heavenly monarch to abdicate and exterminate all the descendants of the heavenly monarch. This old man was lucky back then and coincidentally brought Miss to play in other prefectures. That was how we managed to escape this calamity. However, Shui Hentian was still haunting us. He knew that Miss has a 9-yang constitution, so he has been searching for Miss's whereabouts ever since. Later on, Shui Hentian's men pressured us so much that this old man took the risk and brought Miss to the capital to live in seclusion." Speaking up to here, the white-haired old man sighed deeply and said, "However, this seclusion has been broken. Miss and I will have to travel to the ends of the world again. I don't know if we can escape Shui Hentian's pursuit this time." Zhuowen looked deeply at the white-haired old man. After confirming that the old man was not lying, he slowly withdrew his killing intent. "It turns out that there is such a secret between you two," Zhuowen muttered in a low voice. Then, he waved his sleeve and said, "Since that's the case, this matter has nothing to do with me. Both of you can leave." Zhuowen did not want to be involved in this matter. After all, he did not have any relationship with the white-haired old man and Xiao Yu. Thus, he had no reason to help them. After all, the manor lord of the blood-refining manor, Shui Hentian, was a heaven-defying saint stage expert. Moreover, Shui Hentian possessed an earthly immortal saint artifact. Even if Zhuowen used his trump card, he might not be a match for such an existence. Of course, Zhuowen had the Azure Dragon Palace. If he wanted to escape, Shui Hentian would not be able to kill Zhuowen even if he had an earthly immortal saint artifact. However, the Azure Dragon Palace was of great importance. Moreover, the Azure Dragon Taoist Master was a famous saint 10,000 years ago. Thus, many old men in the central region would be able to recognize the Azure Dragon Palace. Unless it was a last resort, Zhuowen would not take out such a precious treasure. The tallest tree in the forest would be destroyed by the wind. The white-haired old man struggled but did not get up. He stared at Zhuowen with bright eyes and finally said, "My lord, I have a presumptuous request. I wonder if you can agree to it." The zombie-faced young man in front of him had terrifying strength. Moreover, the white-haired old man would never forget the external embodiment that he saw in Zhuowen's room. Based on his experience, the external embodiment gave him a terrifying sense of danger. It almost made him unable to breathe. There was no doubt that this young man's external embodiment was much more terrifying than this young man's original body. "You want me to help you kill Xue Hentian and take back the blood-refining mansion? If it's such a rude request, you'd better give up this idea. You should run for your lives." "Don't involve me," Zhuowen said lightly. The white-haired old man did not give up. He continued, "My lord, do you know why Xue Hentian is looking for my lady? Isn't it because of the 9-yang constitution?" Zhuowen asked. "Yes, but do you know what the 9-yang constitution does?" The white-haired old man seemed to have made up his mind. Looking at the white-haired old man's appearance, Zhuowen narrowed his eyes and said, "Is there something special about the 9-yang constitution?" "Yes. The earthly immortal sacred artifact in Xue Hentian's hands is called the 9-yang Dao Sword. The 9-yang Heaven Lord spent a lot of effort and thousands of years to refine the essence of the noon sun. He used the essence of the sun as the material to forge the 9 Dao swords. Back then, if the Heaven Lord had not trusted Xue Hentian so much that Xue Hentian took advantage of the opportunity to launch a sneak attack, even if the Heaven Lord was seriously injured, he would not have been able to do anything to him." The white-haired old man continued, "Although Xue Hentian obtained the 9-yang Dao Sword, he was unable to unleash the power of the Dao Sword. As far as I know, he could only forcefully use the first Yang Dao Sword and barely use the remaining 8 Yang Dao Swords. As my lady has the 9-yang constitution, she is naturally compatible with the 9-yang Dao Sword. If you control my lady, you will be able to unleash the full power of the 9-yang Dao Sword and unleash the true power of the earthly immortal sacred artifact." Zhuowen's eyes flickered, but he sneered and said, "And then? Even the first Yang Dao Sword has the power of an earthly immortal sacred artifact. It is not something an ordinary warrior can withstand. You want me to help you? Are you trying to send me to my death?" The white-haired old man waved his hand and said, "My lord, you have misunderstood. If my lady was present, she would be able to control the 9-yang Dao Sword and prevent Xue Hentian from using it. Without the 9-yang Dao Sword, Xue Hentian would lose a great help. If my lord can help me and my lady, we will naturally reward you. Moreover, this old man will also give you one of the 9-yang Dao Swords as a reward for this." Zhuowen revealed a thoughtful expression, but his heart was moved. If Xue Hentian was unable to use the 9-yang Dao Sword, perhaps he could really give it a try. Moreover, Zhuowen was also surprised that the white-haired old man was willing to give him one of the 9-yang Dao Swords. After all, if the 9-yang Dao Sword was dismantled, the earthly immortal sacred artifact would no longer be complete. At that time, the power of the 9-yang Dao Sword would be greatly reduced. However, Zhuowen also knew that the white-haired old man had no other choice. After all, it was really difficult for ordinary things to move Zhuowen. Only an earthly immortal sacred artifact was extremely attractive to him. Even if it was only a part of an earthly immortal sacred artifact, its power was much stronger than a heaven-defying saint artifact. "What do you think, my lord?" The white-haired old man was a little worried. He was afraid that the young man in front of him would refuse. After all, the latter was his last hope. Moreover, his intuition told him that the young man in front of him was extremely extraordinary. Perhaps, the young man could really help him and his lady out of this predicament. This was the white-haired old man's gamble with his life. If he gambled correctly, he might be able to reclaim the blood-refining mansion. If he gambled wrongly, he would die. Now, he could only gamble because he and Xiao Yu were already suspected. Next, the two of them would have to face countless experts from the blood-refining mansion. How could the two of them be a match for the blood-refining mansion? Therefore, he placed all his hopes on the young man in front of him. This was also his last resort. Okay, but the reward has to be changed. I need 2 9 Dao swords. One is the first Dao sword and the other is the 9th Dao sword, Zhuowen said indifferently. The white-haired old man's face turned slightly pale. In the end, he sighed and agreed to Zhuowen's request. He had no other choice now. My lord, this old man is called Fan Anfu. You can call me Old Fu. May I know my lord's name? After the two of them reached an agreement, the white-haired old man began to worm his way into being friends. Mu Zhuo, Zhuowen said faintly. Brother Mu, our forces are weak. We can't fight against the army of the blood-refining mansion. As long as you have the opportunity to sneak into the mansion and get close to Shui Hentian, the lady will be by your side. At that time, all you have to do is to kill Shui Hentian. At that time, the lady will control the 9 Dao sword. At that time, no one in the blood-refining mansion will dare to disobey. After all, the 9 Dao sword is the symbol of the blood-refining mansion master, the white-haired old man said with a smile. Chapter 1614. Qing Kang my lord possesses a spatial saint artifact. Elder Fu was stunned at first, but soon after, he was overjoyed. If Zhuowen truly possessed a spatial saint artifact, then he and Xiao Yu wouldn't have to wander around and hide. The young man before him possessed terrifying strength, so hiding in the former spatial saint artifact was undoubtedly the best choice. Use this sandalwood first. Wake up everyone in the inn and arrange for them to leave. After that, I'll bring you into the spatial saint artifact. Zhuowen waved his sleeve and tossed a thumb-sized cube to Elder Fu. This cube faintly emitted a fragrance. Smelling this fragrance, Elder Fu's exhaustion instantly dissipated. The effects of the dream of an eternity seemed to have been dispelled by a lot. Thank you, my lord. Elder Fu bowed and hurried out of the room. After Elder Fu left, Zhuowen didn't inform Long Tian. Instead, he walked to the window and silently looked at the slightly white sky. He knew that dawn was approaching and he would have to make a trip to the Blood General Pavilion. Dong, dong, dong. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Zhuowen knitted his brows and indifferently said, "The door isn't locked. Come in." Just as he finished speaking, the door creaked open, and a delicate and pretty face peeked out a little timidly. Then, this person tiptoed into the room. Her eyes were as bright as the stars as she stared at Zhuowen. In the depths of her eyes, there was a feeling of worship. "Miss Xiao Yu, what brings you here?" Zhuowen had his hands behind his back as he turned around and indifferently stared at the delicate and pretty girl before him. There was no doubt that the first thing Elder Fu did after obtaining the sandalwood was to remove the sleeping incense on Xiao Yu. Otherwise, Xiao Yu wouldn't have been able to find Zhuowen's room so quickly. "I heard from Grandpa Fu that your name is Mu Zhuo. Can I call you Big Brother Mu?" Xiao Yu seemed a little reserved at this moment. At the same time, she recalled that when Zhuowen and Long Tian left the inn, she reminded them not to waste their cultivation time. This scene constantly appeared in her mind, causing a trace of shame to rise in her heart. The redness spread from her cheeks to the roots of her ears. Thinking about how powerful Zhuowen was and how she actually dared to show off in front of Zhuowen, Xiao Yu's heart was filled with complicated feelings. At the same time, she also felt some worship. "Sure," Zhuowen indifferently said. "Then, will Big Brother Mu accept disciples? Big Brother Mu is so powerful, I want to take you as my master." Xiao Yu stuttered. Zhuowen was stunned, and then he shook his head and said, "I don't intend to take any disciples." "Is that so?" Xiao Yu revealed a look of disappointment. Soon after, the two of them fell into a long silence. "However, if you have any problems with your cultivation, you can ask me. I can answer you." Zhuowen slowly turned around and spoke indifferently. Xiao Yu, who was originally disappointed, immediately smiled brightly and said, "Thank you, Big Brother Mu." Zhuowen shook his head. Instead, he looked at the distant sky through the window. Xiao Yu did not disturb Zhuowen. Instead, she silently sat in the room, looking at Zhuowen's slender figure in a daze. After a while, there was another knock on the door. Elder Fu respectfully entered the room and said in a deep voice, "My lord, the guests of the Peace Inn have been dealt with. Since it's done, I'll keep you in my spatial saint artifact. When the time comes, I'll take action." Zhuowen waved his sleeve. A surge of saint energy enveloped Elder Fu and Xiao Yu. Soon after, the two of them disappeared into thin air. The spatial saint artifact that Zhuowen mentioned was naturally the Azure Dragon Hall. Although the Azure Dragon Hall was very precious and contained many of Zhuowen's secrets, Zhuowen was not afraid that Elder Fu and Xiao Yu would know the secrets of the Azure Dragon Hall. After all, Zhuowen was the controller of the Azure Dragon Hall. Under his control, Elder Fu and Xiao Yu would not notice the uniqueness of the Azure Dragon Hall. After dealing with this, Zhuowen called out to Long Tian and left the Peace Inn. Not long after Zhuowen left, a group of cavalrymen on tall horses galloped over and arrived in front of the Peace Inn in an instant. The leader wore black iron armor and carried a black iron spear on his back. His entire body emitted an extraordinary aura. "Sirt," the black-armored man said indifferently. The cavalrymen behind him dismounted from their horses and rushed into the Peace Inn. After a while, several soldiers carried out a dried corpse from the Peace Inn. "Sir, there's no one in the Peace Inn. I only found a dried corpse." Several soldiers threw the dried corpse in front of the black-armored man. The black-armored man glanced at it and his eyes turned gloomy. He recognized the black-clothed corpse from the divine mummy mountain at a glance. It was the person he had sent out last night. But now, the person he sent out was in such a miserable state. The black-armored man's face turned ugly. "Send someone to investigate this matter. We must find the owner of the Peace Inn and his granddaughter." The black-armored man continued, "Today is the day of the Commander-in-Chief battle. Half of the men will follow me back to the mansion. The other half will search the Blood Azure County and find the two of them." With that, the black-armored man led half of the group away from the Peace Inn, while the other half headed off in another direction. At the entrance of the Blood General Pavilion, Blood Demon was wearing a blood-red robe. Behind him was a group of soldiers in blood-red armor. He stood quietly as if he was waiting for someone. This person is so arrogant. He actually made Sir Blood General wait. He's just a helper. If it wasn't for Sir Blood General's appreciation, how could he have the chance to enter the blood refining mansion? Blood Demon stood proudly with his eyes narrowed. The soldiers in blood-red armor behind him were not convinced and kept complaining. "They are here." Blood Demon suddenly opened his eyes and stared at the corner in front of him. There, two figures were slowly walking over. Blood Devil laughed and strode forward. "I thought you weren't coming, brother. Fortunately, you kept your promise and came. Brother Blood Demon, you're too polite. I'm Mu Zhuo. It's my honor to be able to help Brother Blood Demon this time," Zhuowen said with a faint smile. Blood Demon squinted his eyes. Zhuowen's words had a deeper meaning. He wanted to use the name Mu Zhuo. However, Blood Demon was not a person who beat around the bush. He laughed and said, "Brother Mu, you're too polite. It's my honor to be able to receive your help. Today, many generals have arrived at the blood refining mansion. I heard that the remaining 6 Commander-in-Chief have all arrived. This is a grand occasion that has never happened in the Blood Azure County for hundreds of years. Now, Brother Mu, follow me to the blood refining mansion." As he spoke, Blood Demon clapped his right hand. 2 blood-red armor soldiers brought over 2 large horses that had been prepared. Blood Demon took one of the large horses and jumped onto its back. He then pointed at another large horse with his right hand, indicating for Zhuowen to sit on it as well. Zhuowen nodded and also jumped up. The 2 large horses moved side by side. The blood-red armor soldiers followed closely behind, and Long Tian followed behind Zhuowen. The blood refining mansion occupied a large area. Moreover, the dense blood qi in the air above the blood refining mansion seemed to be produced by the mansion. The blood qi probably had something to do with Shui Henshin's cultivation method. Otherwise, it would not have caused such a phenomenon. At the entrance of the blood refining mansion, Blood Demon suddenly pulled on the reins and stopped. Blood Demon's gaze was somewhat unfriendly as he stared ahead. As soon as Blood Demon stopped, Zhuowen naturally stopped as well. Following Blood Demon's gaze, Zhuowen looked ahead. A group of people walked over from the front. Every one of them was wearing bronze armor, and the two people in the lead were also riding tall horses. One of the two people was wearing bronze armor, and his figure was extremely tall and sturdy. His height was almost 10 feet. The person riding the horse next to the burly bronze man was an old man with a slightly stooped back. The old man's face was covered in all kinds of pustules. He looked extremely miserable and nauseating. He is Qing Kang. He is extremely powerful and his cultivation is also in the Yang Heaven Saint stage. It is said that his strength is only below the first general. He has the reputation of being the second general. However, due to my sudden rise in recent years, my limelight has temporarily overshadowed his. Therefore, Qing Kang has always regarded me as a thorn in his side. Blood Demon's voice rang in Zhuowen's sea of consciousness. Zhuowen's eyes slowly narrowed. It seemed that Qing Kang had come with ill intentions. Qing Kang licked his lips. His eyes flashed with a trace of cruelty as he said coldly, "Brother Blood General, you've come quite early. However, as the saying goes, a good dog doesn't block the way. Brother Blood General, please make way and let me in first." With that, Qing Kang ignored Blood Demon. Instead, he kicked the horse's belly and continued to ride toward the entrance of the blood-refining mansion. Although the gate of the mansion was quite wide, it could only accommodate 2 tall horses at most. If Qing Kang and the hunchbacked old man went in, Blood Devil and the others could only wait outside. They could only enter after Qing Kang and the others went in. This would undoubtedly put Blood Demon's side at a disadvantage. Blood Demon naturally wouldn't let this happen. "Brother Mu, let's go in together. Don't let these 2 vicious dogs get in first. Otherwise, it would be a disgrace to our Blood General Pavilion." Blood Demon laughed. Instead of retreating, he continued to ride his horse forward. Zhuowen naturally had no objection and silently followed behind Blood Demon. Qing Kang's eyes flashed with a cold light. He snorted and sped up. The 2 sides had no intention of avoiding each other. They would definitely collide in the end. The 2 guards of the mansion looked at this scene. Although they wanted to stop it, they were powerless. Both Blood General and Qing Kang were outstanding among the generals. They were powerless to mediate the conflict between the 2. After all, they were just guards. Blood Demon and Qing Kang's horses instantly crossed paths. Blood Demon sneered and threw out a punch. Blood Qi spurted out and soared into the sky. Countless blood Qi swam in the air like snakes, making Blood Demon's punch unparalleled. Qing Kang snorted coldly. His right hand's 10 fingers intertwined and pointed. Suddenly, a cyan Qi burst out like countless sword Qi. It was as if Qing Kang's 10 fingers contained thousands of sword essences. Boom! Blood Demon's fist energy and Qing Kang's finger energy instantly intertwined. Immediately after, a crackling sound burst out in the air. An invisible ripple spread out between the 2. This ripple spread out for dozens of feet. Everywhere it touched, the ground and the surrounding buildings were unaffected. Chapter 1615. Blood Cauldron * boom. * blood red and cyan energies intertwined with each other, causing a loud explosion. Qing Kang's expression changed slightly, and the tall horse he was riding staggered back a few steps. Because its hooves couldn't withstand the terrifying collision of internal energies, it directly exploded into a cloud of blood mist. The big horse whined and directly lay on the ground. Qing Kang's expression was ugly, and he couldn't help but jump up to avoid being embarrassed. On the other hand, the Blood Devil's big horse also whined, and the terrifying internal energy swept towards the big horse's internal organs like a hurricane. The terrifying internal energy was enough to make the big horse under the Blood Devil explode. At that time, the Blood Devil would be even more embarrassed than Qing Kang. Zhuowen's gaze was calm. With a wave of his sleeve, a wisp of void power swept out. The moment the internal energy was about to reach the big horse's internal organs, the void appeared and directly transmitted the internal energy into the void, while the Blood Devil's big horse was safe and sound. Qing Kang lightly landed on the ground. His eyes narrowed slightly. First, he looked at the big horse under the Blood Devil, then coldly looked at the zombie-faced young man beside the Blood Devil. In the battle just now, the big horse under the Blood Devil would have made a fool of itself, but the young man beside the Blood Devil made a move. He actually transmitted the internal energy into the void, preventing the Blood Devil from making a fool of himself. This made Qing Kang a little unhappy, but at the same time, he was a little surprised that the Blood Devil had found such an extraordinary helper. Compared to Qing Kang's surprise, the Blood Devil was also extremely shocked. He and Qing Kang were both at the young Sky Saint stage. Even if the two were just casually exchanging pointers, the internal energy that leaked out wasn't something that an ordinary peak profound sage could resist. However, Zhuowen's cultivation was only at the shattering profound sage stage, but he was able to easily dissolve Qing Kang's internal energy. This made the Blood Devil think highly of Zhuowen. Brother Qing Kang's strength is indeed extraordinary. With just one move, you made the big horse under you explode. This Blood Devil is ashamed of his inferiority. At this moment, Blood Demon was feeling rather carefree. Qing Kang had always viewed him as a thorn in his side. Hence, Qing Kang had always been targeting him. Moreover, Qing Kang's strength was extraordinary. Hence, Blood Demon could not do anything to him. But now, thanks to Zhuowen's help, Qing Kang was defeated. Blood Demon felt extremely satisfied and was in a good mood. Qing Kang's face darkened. He looked coldly at Zhuowen and said, "What's your name? Your strength is not bad. You were actually able to annihilate my inner strength. How commendable." Although Qing Kang said this, his tone was filled with murderous intent. Obviously, he was very unhappy with Zhuowen's behavior. Zhuowen glanced at Qing Kang indifferently. Naturally, he could feel the murderous intent in Qing Kang's eyes. He sneered in his heart and turned around, ignoring Qing Kang. This little bastard. Zhuowen's attitude immediately angered Qing Kang. Qing Kang took a step forward. A green aura swept out like a storm. Traces of cracks appeared on the ground under his feet. It looked quite terrifying. "General Qing Kang, this is the entrance of the Shuelian mansion. Do you want to fight?" Blood Demon said coldly. Qing Kang took a deep breath, and the terrifying qi that had erupted from him slowly receded. He stared coldly at Zhuowen and said, "Blood General, you really found the right person. Anyway, the outcome of the Commander-in-Chief is already determined." "You little bastard." Zhuowen frowned. Qing Kang's words seemed to have a deeper meaning. There was also a hint of schadenfreude in his words. This made Zhuowen feel that something was wrong. "General Qing Kang, you talk too much. Brother Mu, let's go in. Some people just like to eat grapes without spitting out the skin." Blood Demon narrowed his eyes and smiled at Zhuowen. He pulled the reins and controlled the tall horse to step into the mansion. Zhuowen followed behind Blood Demon. However, his eyes contained a cold light. No one knew what Zhuowen was thinking at this moment. After Blood Demon and the others entered the mansion, one of Qing Kang's subordinates nimbly brought over a tall horse. Jumping on the horse, Qing Kang waved his hand and led the group into the mansion with a dark look. The Shuelian mansion was huge. In the depths of the mansion, there was a huge square called the Shuelian Plaza. The Shuelian Plaza was tens of thousands of feet wide. In the center of the plaza stood a huge blood cauldron. The blood cauldron was square with 3 legs. It was dozens of feet tall and there were many patterns around the cauldron. There were many patterns, birds and beasts, mountains and rivers, swords and weapons, and ancient people made of animal skin. The surface of the patterns was covered with rust. However, the rust did not obscure the blood cauldron. Instead, it added a sense of vicissitudes to the blood cauldron. This sense of vicissitudes was a feeling that radiated thousands of miles. All the warriors who entered the plaza could not help but be in awe. The blood cauldron was the symbol of the Shuelian mansion. It was neither a sacred weapon nor any treasure. It was just an ordinary cauldron made of some kind of metal. Although it was made of ordinary materials, the blood cauldron was extraordinary. When the Shuelian mansion was first established, the first mansion master used ordinary materials to make the blood cauldron for sacrificial ceremonies and important events. For thousands of years, The blood cauldron had been watered with the blood of countless living beings and carried countless souls. After a long time, the blood cauldron had become extraordinary. Although it was an ordinary cauldron, it had a spirit. With an ordinary cauldron's spirit, the blood cauldron could be called a spiritual cauldron. It was said that because the blood cauldron had carried too much blood and killing, it contained endless evil spirits and resentment. Those who did not have a strong will would lose themselves if they got within 100 meters of the blood cauldron. Even those who had a strong will would not lose their minds if they got too close to the blood cauldron. However, they would be greatly affected and their strength would be affected. Only those who had a strong will could bear the terrifying resentment and suppression of the blood cauldron. Swoosh! A stalwart figure suddenly flew over. He was wearing black armor and his eyes were as sharp as an eagle's. If one took a closer look, he was the black-armored man who had led the troops to the peace inn. The black-armored man's eyes were like torches. He raised his right hand and slammed it on the blood cauldron. Suddenly, an earth-shattering crimson light burst out from the patterns on the blood cauldron. Rumble! A thunderous sound swept out from the blood cauldron. The sound was melodious and long. The mouth of the cauldron spat out a thick crimson light that shot up into the sky and turned into a crimson pillar. The sound of the cauldron accompanied the crimson pillar. It resounded throughout the Schwerlian mansion and attracted the attention of countless living beings. The blood cauldron has sounded. The battle for the commander begins, the black-armored man shouted. His voice seemed to merge with the sound of the cauldron and spread across the sky. It spread throughout the Schwerlian mansion and attracted everyone's attention. At this moment, all the generals and commanders were attracted. Then, they brought their troops and rushed to the Schwerlian mansion. In an instant, the Schwerlian mansion became very lively. The sound of people and horses neighing could be heard as iron hooves stomped on the ground. Countless troops and horses flowed into the Schwerlian mansion from all directions. The pedestrians on the streets of the Schwerlian mansion moved to the sides and stared at the endless stream of troops and horses. They were all stunned. Although many martial artists in the Schwerlian mansion knew about the battle for the commander position, they did not expect it to be so lively. It was a grand occasion. Halt! When the sound of the cauldron rang out, Schwemo and his men, who were walking slowly on the main road of the Schwerlian mansion, suddenly stopped. The chief steward of the Schwerlian mansion has sounded the blood cauldron. It seems that we have come at the right time. Brother Mu, let's hurry to the Schwerlian plaza. The blood demon laughed and glanced at Zhuowen. Then, he urged his horse to gallop toward the end of the road. Zhuowen followed closely behind, not slowing down at all. After a while, the group arrived at a huge plaza. This plaza was the Schwerlian Plaza that Schwemo had mentioned. The most eye-catching symbol of the Schwerlian Plaza was the huge blood cauldron in the middle of the plaza. At this moment, a stalwart black-armored man stood proudly under the blood cauldron. The black-armored man clenched his right fist and knocked on the blood cauldron 3 times. The terrifying sound of the cauldron formed a terrifying pressure in the sky. The pressure was like an angry dragon, roaring and flying in the air. The endless sound of the cauldron radiated in all directions. Moreover, Zhuowen could keenly feel that when the black-armored man knocked on the blood cauldron, an extremely terrifying resentment erupted from the blood cauldron. This resentment was like a landslide or a tsunami, covering the entire plaza. The closer they were to the blood cauldron, the more terrifying the resentment became. Although Zhuowen was at the edge of the plaza, he could still feel the resentment floating in the air. It was like a maggot that wanted to enter his mind. However, Zhuowen's willpower was firm. Moreover, his mental strength was extremely strong. With just a thought, the resentment dissipated. Schwemo stood tall and faced the resentment head-on. His blood-red hair fluttered in the wind, but he remained motionless like a rock. Long Tian's cultivation was not weak. Naturally, he could resist the resentment. However, the soldiers in the blood-red armor who had followed him all revealed painful expressions. They were unable to resist the erosion of the resentment. All of you can leave now. Go to other places in the mansion and wait for me. Schwemo waved his hand and said to the soldiers in the blood-red armor behind him. The soldiers in the blood-red armor were submissive. They cupped their hands at Shui Mo and left the plaza as if they were fleeing. The Blood Refinement Plaza was the most important place in the Blood Refinement Mansion. At the same time, it was also the place where people with weak strength were most unwilling to enter. This was because the resentment of the Blood Cauldron was not something that ordinary warriors could withstand. Brother Mu, the Blood Cauldron is the core of the Blood Refinement Plaza. Only during important events will the Blood Refinement Mansion's chief steward, Kang Feng, knock on it 3 times. However, the Blood Cauldron's main purpose was to offer sacrifices. After thousands of years, too many creatures have been sacrificed. Therefore, the Blood Cauldron has produced an extremely terrifying resentment. Brother Mu, you probably don't know about the other purpose of the Blood Cauldron, right? This cauldron has another purpose. It is the key to open the Blood Refinement Divine Pond. Chapter 1616. Supervisor Kang Feng. Brother Blood Demon, didn't you say that Shui Hentian would only bring the Blood Refining Divine Pond into the Blood Refining Divine Pond after the 2 commanders are selected? How did the Blood Cauldron become the key to the Blood Refining Divine Pond? Zhuoan asked with a frown. Blood Demon smiled and said, the Blood Cauldron is the key to the Blood Refining Divine Pond, but the conditions to open it are extremely harsh. It is said that the Blood Cauldron will open the entrance to the Blood Refining Divine Pond if one can ring the Blood Cauldron 20 times and withstand the massive amount of resentment erupting from the Blood Cauldron. In the entire Blood Refining Mansion, only Mansion Master Shui Hentian can ring the Blood Cauldron 20 times and successfully enter the Blood Refining Divine Pond. Even the number 1 commander, who has reached the heaven-defying Saint Realm, only managed to ring the Blood Cauldron 19 times. Therefore, if you want to enter the Blood Refining Divine Pond, only the Mansion Master can bring you in. It is basically impossible to open the Blood Refining Divine Pond by yourself. Speaking of this, Blood Demon's eyes fell on the Blood Cauldron again with a hint of dread. The Blood Cauldron was unusual. He had tried it before and only managed to ring it 5 times. This time, his cultivation had improved, so his result would be much better than last time. He was confident that he could ring it 8 times this time. 8 times was already a terrifying result. At least, it was difficult for most of the generals to reach this level. Zhuoan nodded to show that he understood. Then he looked around the square. He saw that in the east of the square there was a huge 9-story trapezoidal overpass. On the overpass, there were rows of tables and comfortable seats. Many high-level officials of the Blood Refining Mansion slowly walked over from the east. They chose their own tables and sat down. There was only 1 seat at the top of the overpass. There were 2 rows of graceful maids standing on both sides of the seat. The seat was empty. It was prepared for Mansion Master Shui Hentian. There were similar overpasses on the north and south sides of the square. However, these 2 overpasses only had 8 stories. There were still rows of tables with a variety of fine wines and dishes on them. The high-ranking officials and dignitaries of the Blood Refining Manor and the other counties of the Blood Refining Manor took their seats with their women. Teasing sounds could be heard from time to time. It was quite lively. There were only 8 seats on both the north and south sides of the elevated platform. These 8 seats were prepared for the 8 commanders of the Blood Refining Mansion. However, since 2 of the commanders had fallen, 2 of these 8 seats would inevitably become vacant. As time passed, more and more people began to take their seats on the elevated platforms around the square. The noise also began to become noisy as discussions continued. Those who could enter the Blood Refining Mansion to watch the Commander-in-Chief battle were basically high-ranking officials and dignitaries. It could be said that no one on Dugger was an ordinary person. They all represented a certain level of power. Blood Devil and Zhuoan quietly stood in a secluded corner of the plaza. The 2 of them did not attract anyone's attention. After all, the 2 of them did not stand out, so how could they be recognized? Zhuoan also heard some of the discussions around him. In this Commander-in-Chief battle, I'm afraid that the first General Stonebreak will inevitably occupy one of the vacancies. I'm afraid that the first general will also be Stonebreak. No, the second General Azure Horizon is not weak. After all, he was the closest existence to the first General Stonebreak among all the generals. Have you forgotten about the Blood General who has been in the limelight recently? It is said that the Blood General suddenly rose up in the blood refining county. I've never heard of this person before, nor have I ever seen him. But when he appeared, he shook the heavens and shook the earth. Many generals are not his match. Even Azure Horizon views the Blood General as a thorn in his side. Besides these three, the third General Yarrow Lian is a female general and has been defeated by the Blood General. But her strength cannot be underestimated. The fourth General Demon Shine went into seclusion a long time ago and only just came out. I'm afraid that his strength has skyrocketed. He won't be easy to deal with. The sounds of discussion were like a storm, constantly reverberating around the square. Everyone was guessing who would obtain the final two Commander-in-Chief positions in this Commander-in-Chief battle. Of course, most people believed that the two Commander-in-Chief positions would inevitably appear among the Blood General, Stonebreak, and Azure Horizon. After all, the three of them were indeed recognized as the three strongest generals. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Suddenly, 6 gusts of wind swept in from outside the square. The gusts of wind were like pillars that supported the heavens and penetrated the earth. They looked exceptionally terrifying. In the gusts of wind, an extremely terrifying pressure gushed out, crushing down from the sky. Many people's minds trembled, their expressions were aghast, and a feeling of worship rose in their hearts. Zhuowen's eyes were like torches. Through the gusts of wind, he saw 6 stalwart figures in each of the 6 gusts of wind. Those 6 people are the 6 Commander-in-Chief. Their strength is terrifying, especially the first general. His cultivation is the closest to the Palace Masters. The Blood Demon also raised his head. His eyes fell on one of the 6 gusts of wind, a black hurricane. This black hurricane was far more terrifying than the other 5 gusts of wind. Wherever the black hurricane passed, all life was extinguished. The green grass withered, and the trees withered. In this black hurricane, there was a figure with fluttering black hair. A pair of black eyes, like a peerless demon, was cold and emotionless. This was the first general, a powerful existence closest to the Palace Master, Shui Hentian. Even the Blood Demon was a little wary of him. Of course, Zhuowen only sensed a hint of wariness from the Blood Demon's eyes. There was no fear, as if there was a trace of battle intent. Previously, from the Blood Demon's words, Zhuowen knew that the Blood Demon should belong to a powerful force, and this force should also be in the blood refining mansion. After all, the Blood Demon had been so seriously injured, but he had been able to recover to the Sun Sky Saint realm in such a short time. Without the help of an expert and a powerful force, the Blood Demon could not have achieved what he had now. Therefore, Zhuowen was actually quite wary of the Blood Demon. After all, there was probably a powerful force behind the Blood Demon. However, the Blood Demon had hidden very well and did not reveal any information about the force behind him. The 6 commanders were extremely fast. In an instant, they swept to the top of the elevated platforms on the north and south sides of the square and sat down. With the arrival of the 6 commanders, the originally noisy square quietened down. Everyone's eyes were filled with respect. The commanders were above the general and below the Palace Master. They held the power of millions of soldiers and the power of several counties. It could be said that these 6 people stood at the peak of the blood refining mansion. How could the surrounding people not respect them? The moment the first general sat down, he raised his head and narrowed his eyes. It was as if he was not interested in anything. Blood General, Shalai has already reserved a position for the Commander-in-Chief. The second position belongs to me, Qing Kang. I think you're a smart person. If you don't want to die, you'd better withdraw from the competition. A somewhat ear-piercing voice rang out. Shui Mo and Zhuo Wen furrowed their brows. They turned their heads and saw Qing Kang walking over with a stooped old man. His body carried a savage and ferocious aura. Creak. Qing Kang stopped 3 meters away from the Blood Demon. His eyes were cold as he said, Blood General, you have only been a general for a few years and your background is unknown. Although I don't know why the Palace Master promoted you to general, I advise you not to provoke me. Otherwise, you will die a horrible death. The Blood Demon narrowed his eyes and said indifferently, if you really have the strength to kill me, then you can take my life in the commander battle. I'm afraid you don't have the strength. Qing Kang sneered and said, "You will regret it." As he spoke, Qing Kang's eyes looked past the blood demon and finally landed on Zhuowen. He continued, "Blood General, next time, control the dog beside you. Don't let him bite anywhere. If we were not at the entrance of the blood-refining mansion today, I'm afraid you would have lost a good dog." Zhuowen shifted his gaze and stared coldly at Qing Kang. "You keep saying that others are dogs, but I think you're more like a dog. You're the one who barks the loudest and most cheerfully here." Creak. Qing Kang suddenly clenched his fingers. Green qi lingered on his fingertips. The wild qi in his body became more and more terrifying, almost soaring to the sky. It immediately attracted the attention of many people in the square. "Isn't that the second general, Qing Kang? And the blood general who is in the limelight? These two seem to contradict each other." "That's not right. Qing Kang doesn't seem to be targeting the blood general, but the person beside the blood general. That person looks unfamiliar. He should be the blood general's helper. If you provoke Qing Kang, even the blood general will suffer. This helper is not well known. Judging from his qi, he is only in the shattering mystery saint realm. This kind of cultivation is simply a burden." Many people's attention shifted from Qing Kang to Zhuowen. When they saw that Zhuowen's qi was weak and was only in the shattering mystery saint realm, they were all shocked. Many people even showed a gloating expression. They knew that the blood general's chances of winning the commander battle were slim if he found such a person. Trash in the shattering mystery saint realm. Do you think you are the best in the world just because you destroyed the blood general's internal strength? Today, I, Qing Kang, will teach you a lesson. As he spoke, Qing Kang stepped out and stretched out his 10 fingers. The green qi on his fingertips was so dense that it was terrifying. Countless green sword qi burst out and rushed toward Zhuowen. Blood Demon's eyes were gloomy. He suddenly punched out. Blood qi floated like boiling magma. There was a touch of heat in the blood. Boom. The blood light and the green light collided. The ground between them instantly cracked. However, the two restrained most of their strength and did not cause too much damage. Blood Demon and Qing Kang separated as soon as they collided. Then they both retreated dozens of steps. Their eyes were extremely serious. "Blood General, you forced me to do this." Qing Kang's eyes were red. The green qi on his body was so dense that it was almost solid. A terrifying qi swept over the entire square. Blood Demon's eyes became much more serious, but there was a sneer at the corner of his mouth. "Stop." Chapter 16-17. 9 Sun Dao Sword. Qing Kang's expression changed slightly. He groaned under the pressure and took a few steps back. "Chief Steward." Blood Demon cupped his hands together and said calmly. The black-armored man was the chief steward of the blood-refining mansion, Kang Feng, who had knocked on the blood cauldron earlier. Kang Feng's gaze was extremely cold. He nodded slightly at Blood Demon before his gaze landed on Qing Kang. "Qing Kang, aren't you a little too bold? The commander battle has yet to begin and you've already acted on your own accord. Are you ignoring the rules of the blood-refining mansion?" Kang Feng's gaze was sharp as he said coldly. Cold sweat broke out on Qing Kang's forehead. Kang Feng was the chief steward of the blood-refining mansion. His strength was unfathomable. It was said that he was a heaven-defying saint stage expert. Kang Feng was extremely loyal to Xue Hentian, so he was deeply trusted by Xue Hentian. In the blood-refining mansion, Kang Feng was second only to the mansion master. Kang Feng was considered an influential figure in the blood-refining mansion. After all, he was Xue Hentian's favorite. Although his prestige was not as high as the first commander's, his authority was above the first commander's. Qing Kang hurriedly cupped his hands together and said cautiously, "I wouldn't dare." "Please calm down, Chief Steward. This is a warning. There will be no next time. Before the commander battle, you are not allowed to fight. However, don't blame me for being merciless." After Kang Feng finished speaking, he glanced at Zhuowen, who was behind Blood Demon. Then, he leaped up and landed beside the blood cauldron in the middle. Kang Feng's cultivation is extremely strong. He should be at the initial heaven-defying saint stage. He should be on par with Zhao Ku from the prophet family who chased after you previously. Zhuowen narrowed his eyes. Xiao Hei's solemn voice rang out in his mind. Zhuowen nodded. His heart was filled with dread towards Cangfeng. Furthermore, the black-clothed man that he had killed in the peace in yesterday should have been sent by Cangfeng. However, from the looks of it, Kang Feng probably didn't know that Zhuowen was the one who killed the black-clothed man. Qing Kang coldly glared at the blood demon and Zhuowen, then walked to the side with his helpers. Obviously, he did not want to be near the blood demon and Zhuowen. At this moment, more and more people gathered in the square. At the same time, they approached the edge of the square. Many armored generals brought their helpers to the edge of the square. All the generals were filled with fighting spirit. Their eyes were filled with lofty aspirations. They rubbed their shoulders and rubbed their palms together. They all wanted to perform well in this battle. If they could obtain the position of commander, it would be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for them. That's the third general, Yarrow Lian. His strength is not ordinary, and his helper is very powerful. He's actually from the Yang Sky Saint realm. The blood demon looked around and suddenly pointed at a beautiful figure at the edge of the square as he spoke to Zhuowen. However, the blood demon frowned when he discovered that the helper beside Yarrow Lian was also in the Sun Sky Sacred realm. Generally speaking, the stronger a general was, the more powerful he would be able to find powerful helpers. After all, these generals had been in office for a long time and had a wide network. However, the blood demon had only been in office for a few years, so the number of experts he knew was extremely limited. There was almost no one in the Sky Saint realm. Although there was a mysterious force behind him, the force behind him was hidden behind the scenes. It was impossible for them to send experts to help him. Zhuowen's arrival was undoubtedly timely for the blood demon. Although Zhuowen's strength was not bad, he was only in the arcane shattering saint realm. Even if Zhuowen's strength was comparable to the Sky Moon Saint realm, there was still a large gap between him and the helpers brought by the other generals. Yarrow Lian's helper alone was in the Sun Sky Saint realm. If the two of them worked together, the blood demon and Zhuowen would be in danger. Not only Yarrow Lian, but the helper Qing Kang had brought was also in the Sun Sky Saint realm. This was also why everyone had a strange expression when they discovered that the helper brought by the blood demon was only in the arcane shattering saint realm. The blood general's name had been in the limelight recently. If the blood general could also find a helper from the Sun Sky Saint realm, he would have a very high chance of becoming the commander-in-chief this time. But now, the helper he brought was too weak, so many martial artists around the square began to look down on the blood general. Mo Guang is also here. This guy's helper is also in the Sun Sky Saint realm. The blood demon looked to the other side. There, a tall figure shrouded in black chi slowly walked over. Beside him was another figure. This figure's aura was no weaker than Mo Guang's. He was also in the Sun Sky Saint realm. In addition, most of the helpers brought by the other generals were in the Sun Sky Saint realm. As for those below the Sky Saint realm, most of them were ranked very low. They had neither strength nor connections. While the blood demon was sizing up the other generals were also sizing up the blood demon. In particular, Zhuowen, who was beside the blood demon, attracted the most attention. There was no other reason. Zhuowen's aura was only in the arcane shattering saint realm. Many martial artists were puzzled by the fact that such a low-level martial artist was the helper of the famous blood general. It seems that the blood general is a little confused this time. He actually found trash to be his helper. There's no other way. The blood general has only been in office for a short time. How many people can he know? It's already very good that he could find our arcane shattering saint realm helper. Many of the generals around began to talk, and many of them were mocking Zhuowen. However, Zhuowen turned a deaf ear to them. His gaze fell on the blood cauldron. Just now, the drop of yellow spring hidden in his body had begun to throb, and the source of the throb was the blood cauldron in the square. The massacre of the yellow spring's finger creates the yellow springs through slaughter, and the yellow springs is the final destination of the dead. This blood cauldron has slaughtered countless living beings because of its sacrifice. Does this mean that the resentment in the blood cauldron can be absorbed by the yellow springs and become a part of it? Zhuo Wen stared at the blood cauldron with a fiery look in his eyes. If his idea worked, he might be able to use the blood cauldron to raise the power of his massacre of the netherworld finger to a new level. Xiao He had once said that although the killing finger of Yellow Spring was an immortal technique with a very low threshold, its initial power was much weaker than ordinary immortal techniques. If he wanted to increase the power of the killing finger of Yellow Spring, he had to use slaughter to gather the water of the Yellow Spring to form the Yellow Spring. The larger the Yellow Spring was, the more terrifying the power of the killing finger of Yellow Spring would be. A bunch of ignorant people. Brother Mu, when the battle of the commanders comes, we will definitely stun these frogs at the bottom of the well, Blood Devil said to Zhuowen with an ugly expression. Don't worry, they will be slapped in the face, Zhuowen said unhurriedly. Looking at Zhuowen's appearance, Blood Devil could not help but recall the various scenes with Zhuowen in the past. He felt a chill in his heart. He knew very well how terrifying the willpower of the young man in front of him was and how deep his potential was. In the past, Blood Devil had witnessed the young man defeating the strong as the weak, and this time would not be an exception. Thinking of this, Blood Devil was slightly relieved. Whoosh! An uproar suddenly attracted the attention of Blood Devil and the others. On the other side of the square, a handsome young man in rock armor slowly walked out from the crowd. The young man had a white face and no beard. His black hair fluttered in the wind, and his whole body exuded a free and easy aura. Strangely, when the young man walked over, the surrounding people consciously made way for him. It was as if the handsome young man in rock armor was a demon that everyone feared. It's the first general, Shi Lai. Blood Devil's eyes narrowed, and his voice was filled with dread as he muttered in a low voice. Zhuowen's attention was on Shi Lai, and he nodded slightly. The aura that Shi Lai exuded was faintly discernible. However, with Zhuowen's eyesight, he could vaguely feel that this faintly discernible aura was probably hiding a terrifying power like that of a wild beast. Ding! Suddenly, Kang Feng, who was standing beside Blood Cauldron, punched the cauldron again. His voice came from afar. The blood refining mansion has a total of 108 counties and 108 generals. At this moment, all the generals have arrived, and the 6 commanders have also arrived. Now, I invite the mansion master to attend. Kang Feng's voice resounded in the sky along with the sound of the cauldron. The originally noisy square suddenly quieted down, and everyone's eyes were filled with awe. They knew that the mansion master of the blood refining mansion was about to appear. He stood at the pinnacle of the blood refining mansion and controlled the entire mansion's lifeline. Rumble. In the depths of the blood refining mansion, a terrifying sword essence suddenly shot up into the sky, and a dazzling sun gradually appeared. Is that the sun? No, that's not the sun. It's a treasured sword that emits the light of the sun. The golden light was so dazzling that many people in the square squinted their eyes. They could barely see the treasured sword hidden in the golden light. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The moment the blazing sun rose, another 8 blazing suns rose from the depths of the blood refining mansion. At this moment, 9 blazing suns rose into the sky. Surrounded by 9 blazing suns, a majestic figure walked through the air. When he stepped out, it was as if he was stepping on the 9 blazing suns. He looked like a god, a demon, a god. The 9 Suns Dao Sword, an earthly immortal sacred artifact. The first commander, who was squinting, suddenly opened his eyes. His gaze fell on the 9 blazing suns as he muttered to himself. Swoosh! Xue Henshin's speed was extremely fast. Stepping on the 9 blazing suns, he swept to the only seat on the 9th level of the dugger in the eastern part of the square. After that, Xue Hentian sat on his seat in a rather carefree manner. With a wave of his sleeve, the 9 Yang Dao swords that had carried him all the way here let out 9 sword cries. Shortly after, their radiance dimmed as Xue Hentian kept them in his sleeve. Zhuowen's eyes lit up. With his eyesight, he was able to see that when Xue Hentian kept the 9 Yang Dao sword, he secretly used an extremely powerful saint energy. It was as if he had forcefully kept the 9 Yang Dao sword in his sleeve. Looks like Elder Fu was right. The 9 Yang Dao sword does not belong to Xue Hentian. Otherwise, He would not have forcefully kept the 9 Yang Dao sword when he was controlling it. Chapter 1618. The might of the blood cauldron. Of course, Zhuoan was not in a hurry. All the elites of the blood-refining mansion had gathered at the blood-refining plaza. Wouldn't he be courting death if he made a move now? Furthermore, Xue Hentian had used the 9 Sun Dao sword as soon as he appeared, which had completely stunned the countless martial artists present. Many of them revealed looks of awe. In the previous battle, the 7th and 8th commanders had both fallen. I am quite heartbroken about this. However, the army cannot be without a commander. The dead are gone, so I have decided to choose 2 new commanders. There is no lack of talented individuals with terrifying strength amongst the many generals of our Blood Jade County. I hope that a suitable candidate will be selected to fill the vacant position of commander in this selection. Xue Hentian had an average appearance. Furthermore, there was a long scar on his right cheek, which made him look quite ferocious. At this moment, Xue Hentian stood up as a thunderous voice boomed out, exploding in the surroundings. Therefore, the battle for the commander will now begin. Kang Feng will be in charge. Kang Feng bowed towards Xue Hentian from afar, before turning around. His eyes were cold as he stared at the many generals at the edge of the plaza and said, "I believe that everyone is well aware of the benefits of becoming a commander." When these words were spoken, the surrounding generals nodded their heads. Not only would a commander control millions of troops, but he would also have the qualifications to soak in the blood-refining deity pool. How could they not be tempted by such benefits? There are a total of 108 generals in the blood-refining mansion. Including your helpers, there are a total of 266 people. The first stage of the battle for the commander position is very simple. You must enter within 100 meters of the blood cauldron after I have sounded it 10 times. Otherwise, you will be eliminated. Kang Feng stood proudly. Soon after, his right hand formed a palm and violently slammed against the body of the blood cauldron. Rumble. The sound of the cauldron was like thunder. It rumbled and echoed in everyone's ears. At the same time, an extremely terrifying bloody aura surged out from the blood cauldron. This bloody aura was mixed with a terrifying resentment. Bang bang bang. After the first blood cauldron sound, Kang Feng's right foot stomped on the ground. His palm was like the wind as it rapidly slammed against the body of the blood cauldron 3 times. The sound of 3 cauldrons rang out continuously. They gathered together and stacked up like waves. A heavenly pressure surged out from the blood cauldron and crushed the entire square. The faces of the generals at the edge of the square turned solemn. They could already feel the faintly discernible pressure. The blood cauldron that stood in the middle of the square was about 50,000 feet away from the edge of the square. Even from such a distance, the pressure of the blood cauldron was already so obvious. If he stepped within 100 meters of the blood cauldron, the pressure would probably increase by hundreds or thousands. Furthermore, this was only 4 knocks, yet it was already able to emit such pressure. If it was 10 knocks, wouldn't the pressure be even more terrifying? Before the generals could react, Voltsheath moved once again. His right palm was extremely fast, and in an instant, he struck the cauldron twice. 2 thunderous sounds immediately exploded. The terrifying pressure actually formed a huge storm within 100 meters of the cauldron. Strands of bloody aura erupted, dyeing the area blood red. It seemed like a bloody mist, which was extremely vicious and terrifying. If one were to observe carefully, one would see that the bloody aura lingering on the surface of the storm continuously intertwined to form many strange human faces. These faces appeared to be in extreme pain and their expressions were hideous. These were the resentment of the blood cauldron. Voltsheath's eyes narrowed. The black light on the surface of his body flickered and intertwined like a wriggling python. It was this black light that helped Voltsheath resist the surrounding pressure and the erosion of the resentment. Voltsheath was indeed a heaven-defying Saint Realm expert. Even in such a terrifying blood-red storm, he was as steady as Mount Tai. The 7th and 8th knocks. Voltsheath snorted coldly and struck the cauldron twice more. At this moment, the crisp sound of the cauldron was no longer heard. Instead, it was replaced by a terrifying wailing sound. When one first heard this sound, Even those with strong willpower could not help but feel goosebumps on their backs. The pressure at the edge of the square also became more and more terrifying. It was at least 10 times stronger than before. However, this was the edge of the square, and the 108 generals and their helpers were not ordinary people. Therefore, no one felt the slightest bit of unease. Powerful restrictions were set up on the elevated platforms around the square. Although the pressure and the wailing sound from the blood cauldron was terrifying, they were all blocked by the restrictions. The people in their seats were not affected at all. The 9th knocks. Voltsheath's cold voice rang out again. Then, he suddenly waved his palm and slammed it on the blood cauldron. In an instant, the wailing sound seemed to be amplified by several times. It constantly rang in everyone's ears, as if someone was crying right in front of them. The range of the blood-red storm instantly expanded, reaching several hundred meters. The pressure within the storm had already reached an extremely frightening level. Even Kang Feng's pupils shrank as he took 2 steps back. The 10th knocks. Voltsheath took 2 steps forward and stood in front of the blood cauldron. He slowly raised his right hand and slammed it on the blood cauldron. Dong! The clear and melodious sound of the cauldron rang out again. However, the sound was instantly drowned out by the wailing sound. The mouth of the cauldron spewed out a terrifying blood aura. The blood-red storm expanded again, reaching a radius of 1,000 meters. If one were to look at it from afar, such a terrifying blood-red storm was like a pillar that supported the heavens. It was truly a spectacular sight. However, if one were to look closely, one would be able to see that within the blood-red storm, there were countless grievances mixed within the storm. The grievances constantly transformed into various faces. However, these faces all had one thing in common, and that was that they all had a pained expression on their faces. After the 10th knocks, Voltsheath's expression changed slightly. His right foot stomped on the ground, and he immediately retreated from the blood-red storm like a sharp sword. Although Voltsheath's strength was enough to withstand the blood-red storm, he did not plan to do so. In his opinion, the tearing force of the blood-red storm was too terrifying. He would need to use his saint energy to resist it, which would consume too much of his energy. This time, he was only here to preside over the commander battle, not to participate in it. Everyone, you may begin. As long as you can enter within 100 meters of the blood cauldron, you will pass this round. Otherwise, you will be eliminated. By the way, I would like to remind you that all the generals have brought their helpers with them. This is the first sentence. If either the general or the helper is unable to enter within 100 meters of the blood cauldron, both of them will be eliminated. As soon as Voltsheath finished speaking, the other generals, who were ready to make a move, froze. This was especially so for those generals whose helpers were not very strong. Their expressions turned ugly. The blood demon was among them. His blood-red eyes narrowed as he looked at Zhuowen beside him. He wanted to say something but hesitated. In the end, he let out a soft sigh. He hoped that Zhuowen could withstand the pressure and grievances of the blood cauldron and enter within 100 meters of the blood cauldron. Hee. I like this rule. It can eliminate some trash, especially those trash helpers. Qing Kang laughed coldly from a short distance away. His gaze was faintly discernible as he glanced at Zhuowen. Qing Kang's obvious action immediately attracted the attention of others. Everyone's eyes fell on Zhuowen, who was beside the blood demon. After Qing Kang's ruckus, everyone knew that the famous blood general had only found a helper of the arcane shattering saint realm. Given the blood general's reputation, he should have at least found a helper of the sky yin saint realm. But now, he had found an arcane shattering saint realm helper. It could be said that this helper of the arcane shattering saint realm was of little value to the blood general. Interesting. The blood general actually found a helper of the arcane shattering saint realm. It seems that I have one less competitor. Mo Guang, who was shrouded in demonic qi, sneered. His laughter was full of mockery. Yarrow Lian, who was wearing a sexy armor, glanced at the blood demon and Zhuowen with his charming eyes. He chuckled but did not say anything. However, it could be seen from his eyes that Yarrow Lian was disdainful of the blood demon's gaze. As for Shalai, he crossed his arms. He did not even look at the blood demon and Zhuowen. To be more precise, he did not put the other generals and helpers in his eyes. As far as he was concerned, no one present was a match for him. The battle of commanders this time was simply a stage for him alone. Not to mention his reputation as the #1 general, just his cultivation base at the Sky Saint stage was far from what the other generals could compare to. Therefore, the moment Shalai walked into the blood refining square, his eyes fell on the blood cauldron. Perhaps he didn't really care about the title of commander, but what he cared about was the opportunity to enter the blood refining divine pond during the battle of the commanders. He did not need an empty title. What he needed was real strength. The blood demon snorted. He had nothing to say about Zhuowen's low cultivation. However, he believed that with Zhuowen's strength, it should not be a problem for him to enter the 100-meter range in the first test. "You may begin." Kang Feng glanced at the blood demon and said indifferently, "Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh." As soon as he said that, the 108 generals led their helpers forward together. The first test was not something that could be passed by themselves. They had to pass it together with their helpers. If one person was eliminated, the other person would be eliminated as well. Therefore, the 108 generals did not dare to be careless. "Trash, I look forward to your performance." Qing Kang looked at Zhuowen provocatively. Then, he led the stooped old man and turned into a rainbow as he rushed toward the blood cauldron. "Brother Mu, ignore Qing Kang. If you enter the 100-meter range later, I want to see what kind of expression Qing Kang will have," the blood demon said in a deep voice. Although the blood demon's words were filled with concern, Zhuowen could hear the doubt in his voice. Clearly, the blood demon doubted whether Zhuowen could pass the test of the blood cauldron. After all, this was the key to whether he could become the commander. Chapter 16-19. Yellow Springs. The blood demon looked deeply at Zhuowen and said, "Let's go then. Let's try to get within 100 meters as soon as possible." Zhuowen shrugged and followed behind the blood demon. The edge of the square was 50,000 feet away from the blood cauldron, which was equivalent to 16,000 meters. For the participants of the Commander-in-Chief battle, this distance could be covered in an instant. However, the reality was that the surrounding generals and helpers were not as fast as they had imagined. Moreover, the closer they got to the blood-colored storm, the slower they moved. The pressure produced by knocking the blood cauldron 10 times was extremely terrifying. It was like a wave that was higher than the one before. It was extremely terrifying. Of course, there were some generals and helpers who purposely slowed down to conserve energy. The blood cauldron's pressure will only last for the time it takes for a stick of incense to burn. After that, the blood-colored storm will dissipate. Those who do not get within 100 meters will be eliminated. Kang Feng had clearly noticed the sneaky people and spoke indifferently. As soon as he finished speaking, the generals and helpers who had purposely slowed down immediately rushed towards the blood-colored storm with all their might. Boom boom. Suddenly, 2 figures flew out from the front and heavily smashed into the ground a few hundred meters away. Looking at their decorations, they should be a general and a helper. However, their cultivation was extremely low compared to the others. They were only at the broken profound saint realm. The 2 of them stared at the pressure and arrived at the 1,000-meter bloodstorm. The moment they stepped into it, the pressure inside suddenly increased. The 2 of them didn't pay attention and were directly repelled by the sudden increase in pressure. Of course, the 2 of them were not the only ones who were sent flying. After that, a few more people were sent flying. These people were undoubtedly the weakest among the generals. Qing Kang led the hunchbacked old man into the blood-colored storm. With their strength, they did not fly back. Instead, they walked steadily into the depths of the blood-colored storm. Of course, the moment Qing Kang stepped into the blood-colored storm, he turned back to look at Zhuowen and the blood demon behind him and sneered. Shalai and his helper have already entered within 100 meters. They are temporarily in first place. Not long after Qing Kang entered the bloody storm, Kang Feng's voice suddenly rang out, instantly attracting the attention of countless people. Soon after, everyone discovered that there were 2 figures quietly standing at the center of the bloody storm beside the blood cauldron. One of them was the stone-armored Shalai, while the other was his helper. This Shui is so terrifying. Not only did he enter within 100 meters, but he also came directly to the side of the blood cauldron. As expected of the number 1 general, many of the surrounding people were surprised as they looked at the figure that was as immovable as a mountain. Even the mansion master, Shui Hentian, who was sitting on the 9th floor, nodded his head inwardly with admiration in his eyes. In Shui Hentian's opinion, Shalai's talent was outstanding in the entire blood-refining mansion. This time, Shalai would definitely be selected for the position of commander. Moreover, if used properly, Shalai would become Shui Hentian's right-hand man in the future. Therefore, Shui Hentian was quite concerned about Shalai. In addition, Shui Hentian was also quite concerned about the blood demon. However, when he saw that the helper chosen by the blood demon was only at the shattering profound saint realm, he frowned slightly. What is the blood general thinking? Why did he choose a shattering profound saint realm helper? The position of commander is also an opportunity for him. With this kid doing this, I can't even let him enter the blood-refining deity pond. Shui Hentian was quite helpless. He more or less knew the identity of the blood general. Moreover, a few old men had sent him a letter, asking him to take care of the blood general. Although those old men's forces were not obvious, Shui Hentian knew that their forces were definitely not inferior to his. They even had more heaven-defying saint realm experts than the blood-refining mansion. If it were not for the fact that Shui Hentian had an earthly immortal saint weapon, the 9-yang Dao sword, he might not be able to intimidate those old men's forces. Of course, even so, Shui Hentian did not dare to provoke such a huge force. After all, if they really fought, the result would be a lose-lose situation. This was not the result that Shui Hentian wanted. Forget it. If the blood general can't even pass the first stage, then it's not my fault. It's the kid's responsibility. Even if those old men ask, it has nothing to do with me, Shui Hentian murmured. When Shalai arrived near the blood cauldron, the blood demon and Zhuoan had also arrived at the edge of the bloody storm. This Shalai is indeed the first general. He actually reached within 100 meters in such a short time, the blood demon said coldly with scarlet eyes. Let's go in. With that, the blood demon stepped in, and Zhuoan followed closely behind. The moment he stepped in, Zhuoan felt hundreds of thousands of pressure crushing down on his shoulders, causing Zhuoan to tremble. Fortunately, the saint power in his body was circulating, and he was able to completely resist the pressure. Moreover, such a terrifying pressure was not the only thing present in the blood-red storm. At the same time, there was also a terrifying resentment that sounded like the wailing of ghosts and the howling of wolves. The resentment was like a snake that was actually drilling into Zhuowen's orifices. Brother Mu, are you all right? The pressure and resentment of the blood cauldron should not be underestimated. Be careful, the blood demon said with a frown. Zhuowen nodded, but said, Brother blood demon, you go ahead first. I'll catch up later. Brother Mu, what do you mean? The blood demon's voice was a little cold. Zhuowen's eyes were indifferent as he said, I think Brother blood demon doesn't really trust me. Since you don't trust me, why did you choose me as your helper in the first place? The blood demon was silent for a moment, then looked deeply at Zhuowen. He suddenly laughed and said, Brother Mu, you must be joking. I was reckless just now. If Brother Mu catches up later, I'll understand. I'll take my leave first. With that, the blood demon turned around and walked towards the center of the storm. Although his pace was not fast, it was extremely steady. The blood demon is really strange. He obviously doesn't trust your strength, but he chose you as his helper. This is really contradictory. After the blood demon left, Xiao Hei's voice rang out. However, Zhuowen sneered and said, the blood demon probably has some ulterior motives. As for what his motive is, he will show his true colors when the time comes. With that, Zhuowen's gaze fell on the resentful spirits around him and said, Xiao Hei, the yellow springs represents reincarnation. Can the water of the yellow springs absorb these resentful spirits? I'm not very sure about this. You'll know when you try, Xiao Hei said with uncertainty. Hearing this, Zhuowen flicked his finger, and a drop of the yellow springs appeared on his fingertip. As soon as the drop of the yellow springs appeared, the countless resentful spirits that were surging over scattered as if they had seen a ghost. These resentful spirits are afraid of the yellow springs. Hihi, let me try. Zhuowen grinned and pointed with his right finger. The yellow spring's water droplet shot out like an arrow. Wherever it passed, the resentful spirits avoided it. However, some of the resentful spirits that couldn't avoid it were contaminated by the yellow spring's water droplet and evaporated. Withdraw. Zhuowen withdrew his right hand, and the yellow spring's water droplet floated on his fingertip. At this moment, Zhuowen vaguely noticed that the yellow spring's water droplet seemed to be 30% larger than before. It's indeed useful. These resentful spirits can indeed grow the yellow spring's water droplet. Zhuowen licked his lips and looked at the resentful spirits around him with a different kind of glow. This glow was like a cheetah that had seen a delicious prey, filled with desire. Thinking of this, Zhuowen secretly added the law of the void to the yellow spring's water droplet. Immediately, the yellow spring's water droplet's speed soared to the extreme. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. The yellow spring's water droplet was like a yellow lightning bolt that flashed past in an instant. It was always able to suck in the surrounding resentful spirits. In less than 10 breaths of time, the resentful spirits around Zhuowen were all absorbed by the yellow spring's water droplet. As the yellow spring's water droplet absorbed enough resentful spirits, it actually split into a second yellow spring's water droplet. Compared to the entire bloody storm, Zhuowen's range was too small, so no one paid attention to Zhuowen. However, Shalai, who was standing beside the blood cauldron, seemed to have sensed something. His sharp eyes turned slightly and suddenly fell on Zhuowen, who was at the edge of the bloody storm. This kid is strange. The resentful spirits around him seemed to be very afraid of him. Shalai squinted his eyes. However, when he saw that Zhuowen was only at the arcane shattering saint realm, he shook his head and no longer paid attention. This kind of cultivation was really not worthy of his attention. If it was not for the resentful spirits around this kid, he would not have noticed him. My lord, that person seems to be the blood general's helper. The helper beside Shalai said respectfully. Shalai nodded and looked back at the blood cauldron. He muttered, the blood cauldron can only open the blood refinement divine pond after 20 knocks. I wonder how many knocks I can make. At this moment, the blood demon had arrived within 100 meters of the bloody storm with difficulty. Qing Kang and his helper had arrived before him and were looking at the blood demon with a cold smile. Yo, blood demon, your strength is not bad. You have arrived here so early. However, where is your trashy helper? Don't tell me he can't even get within 1,000 meters of the bloody storm? Qing Kang sneered and looked faintly at Zhuowen, who was still at the edge of the bloody storm. At this moment, Zhuowen was controlling the yellow springs to absorb the resentful spirits. Therefore, he was still at the same spot and did not move forward at all. This made Qing Kang mistakenly think that this kid was not strong enough and could not move forward at all. This made Qing Kang gloat in his heart. Humph! The blood demon snorted. The truth was in front of him and he could not refute it. However, he was very anxious in his heart. He did not know why Zhuowen was not willing to come over. After all, the bloody storm had a time limit. If he did not arrive within the time it took for an incense stick to burn, he would also be eliminated. At this moment, Zhuowen stared at the 2 drops of yellow springs floating in his palm with a burning gaze. He muttered to himself, if I want to condense more yellow springs, then I must absorb more resentment. Chapter 1620. LV Gensplash. The moment Zhuowen took a step forward, the densely packed resentment in the surroundings all retreated. The surrounding resentful spirits stared at the young man walking towards them in fear. Or rather, they were staring at the 2 drops of yellow spring around the young man. The yellow spring contained the power of life and death, as well as reincarnation. It gave them a strong sense of threat. Zhuowen sneered. The 2 drops of yellow spring that contained the laws of the void were unparalleled in the world. How could these resentful spirits retreat? In an instant, the vacuum environment around Zhuowen expanded from a few dozen feet to a few dozen feet. There was no resentment gathering in this area, not even the presence of blood qi. This strange phenomenon immediately attracted the attention of the Blood Demon and Qing Kang, who were in the center of the storm. "My lord, the surrounding resentful spirits seem to be afraid of this young man?" The old man with pustules on his face beside Qing Kang asked in surprise. Qing Kang's eyes were cold. He could tell even without the old man's reminder. He said coldly, "It seems that although this young man's cultivation is low, he has some tricks up his sleeve. He actually has a way to make the resentful spirits retreat." Qing Kang then changed the topic and continued, "However, there are not only resentful spirits here, there is also pressure." Qing Kang's words were very obvious. He did not believe that Zhuowen, who was only a fragmented profound saint, could withstand the pressure of the blood cauldron and reach 100 meters away. On the other hand, Blood Demon was the exact opposite. His gaze was even sharper than Qing Kang's. He could see that there were 2 yellow water droplets flashing around Zhuowen's body. The surrounding resentful spirits seemed to be afraid of the yellow drops of water. If they were touched by the yellow drops of water, they would disappear immediately. The yellow drops of water also seemed to be growing stronger. It seems that Brother Mu was referring to this when he said that he had something to do. What are the yellow spring droplets? They can actually absorb resentful spirits. The Blood Demon narrowed his eyes and stared at the young man who was walking slowly. He realized that he could not see through Zhuowen anymore. Back then, although Zhuowen's talent and strength were pretty good, the Blood Demon still knew about Zhuowen's background. But now, Zhuowen was like a cloud of fog in his eyes. He wanted to see what was going on, but he found that his vision was hazy and blurry. There was no doubt that Zhuowen had had a new fortuitous encounter while the Blood Demon was away. However, the Blood Devil was still a little anxious because Zhuowen was walking very slowly at this moment. Moreover, he would stop every now and then. The Blood Devil doubted whether Zhuowen could get within 100 meters of him in the time it took for an incense stick to burn. The third yellow spring. Zhuowen pointed with his right hand as 3 drops of yellow springs floated above his palm. He could clearly feel the massacre yellow spring's fingers' power increasing. Yellow spring droplets. I wonder how many yellow spring droplets I can. Zhuowen murmured. His speed was not fast. The void law constantly poured into the yellow spring droplets, making them as fast as lightning. They constantly flashed in the air and absorbed the resentful spirits. Time passed slowly. Demon Shine and Yarrow Lian, as well as their helpers, had arrived within 100 meters. They naturally saw Rockbreak, Qingtsang, and the Blood General who had already arrived. The 3 of them were popular candidates for this commander-in-chief battle. Their strength was beyond doubt. However, what surprised the 2 was that the Blood General was alone. His helpers had not arrived. The cultivation of Shattering Profound Saint is really too low. I'm afraid that the Blood General will be dragged down by his helpers. Demon Shine and Yarrow Lian glanced at each other, revealing a knowing smile. If the Blood General was eliminated in the first round, then they would undoubtedly lose a strong competitor. For them, this was a rare good thing. At this moment, within 1,000 meters of the bloody storm, there were more and more generals and helpers entering. Those who could be conferred the title of general were not weak. Except for a few generals at the bottom who could not enter the bloody storm, the other generals and their helpers entered the storm quite easily. Of course, the pressure inside the blood-red storm was dozens of times stronger than the outside world. Even some of the Yin Sky Saint stage generals slowed down after entering the blood-red storm. They walked as slowly as a snail. Moreover, the dense resentful spirits in the bloody storm were extremely terrifying. These resentful spirits could completely affect the mind of those with weak willpower and make them lose their minds. Most of the generals and helpers who entered the storm had blood-red eyes. They roared inhumanly. Obviously, they were resisting the erosion of the resentful spirits. Rockbreak is indeed the first general. He arrived within 100 meters of the blood cauldron so quickly and is standing beside it. The generals who entered the storm naturally noticed the very conspicuous and proud figure standing beside the blood cauldron. It was not that there were no people who entered within 100 meters, but only Rockbreak and his helper were standing beside the blood cauldron. The pressure beside the blood cauldron was undoubtedly the strongest in this area. To be able to withstand such terrifying pressure, It was obvious that Rockbreak and his helper were extremely extraordinary. In addition, the second General Qing Kang, the Blood General who is in the limelight, Yarrow Lian, and Demon Shine have all arrived. They are really fast. Shifting their gazes away from Shalai, the gazes of the other generals landed on Qing Kang and the other three. Their eyes were filled with envy. Hey! The Blood General's helper doesn't seem to be within 100 meters of the Blood Cauldron. Has he been eliminated? Someone exclaimed and immediately realized that something was wrong. Rockbreak, Qing Kang, and the others were all accompanied by helpers. Only the Blood General was alone. He shouldn't have been eliminated. After all, if the Blood General's helper was eliminated, the Blood General wouldn't be standing within 100 meters. I'm afraid the Blood General's helper is still in the storm. Someone looked around with malicious intent, as if trying to find the helper of the Blood General. All the generals present knew that the Blood General's helper was only at the shattering profound Saint Realm. In the eyes of a Sky Saint Realm expert, a shattering profound Saint Realm expert was trash and insignificant. However, such trash was the Blood General's helper. Coupled with the rules of the first stage, some people had already begun to have evil thoughts. These generals naturally knew their limits. They knew that Blood Generals were well known in the Blood Refining Mansion and their strength could not be underestimated. With their strength, it was impossible for them to compete with Blood Generals. However, it was different now. The Blood General's helper was only at the shattering profound Saint Realm. If the Blood General's helper was eliminated in the storm, then the Blood General would be eliminated in advance. With this thought in mind, many generals around began to look for Zhuowen's figure with ferocious eyes. Over there. Hehe, my luck is pretty good. The Blood General's helper is not far from me. If I eliminate this helper, it's the same as eliminating the Blood General. Hehe, not far from Zhuowen, a general in granite armor suddenly locked his eyes on Zhuowen with a trace of coldness in his eyes. The general was fat and had a big belly. At first glance, he looked like a mountain of meat. He walked rather comically. Moreover, the general's strength was not ordinary. He had actually reached the Sky Yin Saint Realm. However, his aura was weaker than the average Sky Yin Saint Realm expert. He should have just entered the Sky Yin Saint Realm. If people know that I, Biao Fei, personally eliminated the Blood General, I'm afraid my reputation will rise in a short period of time. At that time, the Mansion Master may have a whole new level of respect for me. Licking his lips, the general named Biao Fei stared at Zhuowen while fantasizing. Then he said to the black-clothed man beside him, Lu Jian, kill this guy. General, don't worry. He's only at the shattering profound Saint Realm. I can kill him with one move. The man named Lu Jian's eyes were cold. He stepped on the ground and instantly rushed toward Zhuowen like an arrow released from a bow. The moment he rushed out, his right hand grabbed his waist and suddenly pulled. A sword light flashed and a crystal-clear sword appeared in his hand. I found the Blood General's helper. Damn it, Biao Fei beat me to it. The moment Lu Jian pulled out his sword and rushed out, he was immediately noticed by the other generals. Their faces all turned ugly. Although they also wanted to kill Zhuowen before Biao Fei, it was a pity that they were much further away than Biao Fei. They were afraid that before they rushed over, the Blood General's helper would have already been killed by Lu Jian's sword. Biao Fei, this bastard, is simply courting death. Blood Demon's pupils shrank and revealed a tyrannical look. However, he had just stepped out when he suddenly stopped. His face was uncertain. Haha, Brother Blood General, the contestants who enter within 100 meters can't go out. Once they go out, they will be considered as having forfeited. Of course, with Brother Blood General's current situation, the result will be the same whether you go out or not. Qing Kang laughed heartily. His slender eyes stared at the Blood General with a rather playful expression. Blood Demon narrowed his eyes and snorted. That's not necessarily true. Brother Blood General, you really like to lie through your teeth. Your trash helper is only at the arcane shattering Saint Realm, while Biao Fei's helper, Lu Jian, is a famous killer in the Blood Refining Mansion. His cultivation is at the Sky Yin Saint Realm and he has killed people of the same level. Do you think that trash can, however, before Qing Kang could finish his words, his body suddenly trembled. He stared at something not far away in disbelief and fell silent. Blood Demon also saw Qing Kang's abnormality. His eyes were filled with confusion. He followed his gaze and the corners of his mouth curled up. Lu Jian, who had rushed over like lightning, stopped in midair when he was 3 meters away from Zhuowen. It was as if time had stopped. Then, Lu Jian roared at the sky. His voice was filled with pain. Then his skin began to wither and he turned into a dried corpse. Boom. Chapter 1621. Biaofei Hiss. The surrounding generals, who originally thought that Biaofei was greedy, fell silent. Soon after, they collectively sucked in a breath of cold air. The other generals knew Biaofei's helper, Lu Jian. Lu Jian was an extremely famous assassin of the blood-refining mansion and his hands were once stained with the blood of a saint of the same level. Lu Jian had even tried to assassinate the Sun-Sky Saint boundary. Although he failed and was seriously injured, he survived the attack of the Sun-Sky Saint boundary and escaped from the Sun-Sky Saint boundary's pursuit. It could be said that even in the Yin Sky Saint realm, LV Jian could be considered one of the best. But now, Lu Jian had turned into a dried corpse when he was still 3 meters away from the Blood General helper. This scene was too strange. Everyone's eyes slowly moved up and finally landed on Zhuowen. At this moment, yellow water droplets surrounded him. His long hair fluttered in the wind and his cold eyes made him look like a demon god. If everyone did not remember wrongly, it seemed that after Lu Jian died, 5 yellow water droplets similar to the one around this person's body appeared and merged with his body. There was no doubt that Lu Jian's death was related to this person. At this moment, Zhuo Wen's eyes flickered. He had sensed the terrifying killing intent in LV Jian's eyes the moment he leaped over. Therefore, before LV Jian rushed over, he had secretly controlled a drop of yellow spring to hide nearby. Lu Jian's strength was indeed not bad, but he was too careless. In addition, Zhuowen's cultivation was only at the arcane shattering saint boundary, so Lu Jian didn't take Zhuowen seriously at all. The moment he was within 3 meters of Zhuowen, Zhuowen immediately controlled the hidden drop of yellow spring to burrow into Lu Jian's back without anyone noticing. In that moment of carelessness, Lu Jian's back was invaded by the yellow spring and his vitality was instantly taken away. However, what surprised Zhuowen was that after the yellow spring absorbed all of Lu Jian's essence, it actually split into 4 drops of yellow spring. It seems that Lu Jian has done many shameful things and his sins are much heavier than ordinary people. That's why he was able to split into 4 drops of yellow spring. Zhuowen's right hand held the 4 drops of yellow springs that had just swept out from LV Jian's body, the corners of his mouth revealing a smile. He had only absorbed 6 drops of yellow springs from the resentment around him, but LV Jian alone had brought him 4 drops of yellow springs. It was obvious how much the sinners nurtured the yellow springs. Lu Jian, how is this possible? How did Lu Jian die? Biaofei's eyes bulged. His big belly trembled violently and rippled. He stared at Zhuo Wen and then slowly stepped back. The guy in front of him was too strange. He was clearly just a fragmentary profound saint, but LV Jian, who was a yin profound saint, had died before he could even get close to him. This made Biaofei, who was weaker than LV Jian, feel fear in his heart. It seems that some people think that I, Mu Zhuo, am easy to bully. If you really think that I am easy to bully, then go ahead. I, Mu Zhuo, will accompany you. Zhuowen's hands were behind his back as he looked around indifferently. His clear voice slowly came out from his roar and resounded in everyone's ears. As soon as these words came out, the generals who originally had the same thoughts as Biaofei all trembled and remained silent. Although I am only a helper of the Blood General, I am not a pushover in everyone's eyes. If someone wants to treat me as a pushover, then don't blame me for using that person as a pushover. Speaking up to here, Zhuowen's eyes suddenly became extremely sharp. Then, he suddenly took a step forward and flew straight towards Biaofei with lightning speed. Biaofei, who was originally terrified, couldn't help but panic when he saw that Zhuo Wen was actually heading straight for him. No, this person is only a fragmentary profound saint. What's so great about this kind of cultivation? Just now, LV Jian was probably killed by some despicable means, and this means must be this person's trump card. Now that he has used it, I don't believe that this person is my opponent. Biao Fei seemed to be muttering to himself as he comforted himself. Soon after, he let out a loud roar and his big belly shook violently. Biao Fei's body instantly swelled. His originally 10-foot-tall body suddenly swelled by more than 10 times, turning him into a 10-foot-tall giant. At first glance, Biao Fei was like a small mountain, especially his belly, which actually occupied 2/3 of his entire body. It looked particularly conspicuous. The first style of the giant god tactic, Mount Tai collapses. Biao Fei roared angrily and suddenly chopped down with his palm. Saint Chi rushed out like a torrent and soared up, forming a huge mountain in the sky. This mountain flashed with golden light and suddenly crushed down like a collapsed Mount Tai. It had a kind of power that was difficult to reach. Zhuowen pointed his right hand and a drop of yellow spring condensed at the tip of his sword finger. It actually gave birth to a foot-long yellow spike. Then, Zhuowen fiercely pointed at the golden mountain. Boom! Under the fingertip formed by the yellow spring, the mountain collapsed like a piece of paper. Zhuowen waved his sleeve and still rushed toward Biao Fei like an arrow released from a bow. Fear finally appeared in Biao Fei's eyes as he roared, the last style of the giant god tactic, Mountain of Flesh Crush. As he spoke, Biao Fei's belly suddenly swelled up to hundreds of feet, like a terrifying mountain of flesh, crushing down from the sky. Biao Fei was forced to use the last style of the giant god tactic. This blood general's helper is really not simple. He's just a Shatterer saint, but he can actually force a Yin saint to such a situation. The moment the endless crushing mountain of flesh appeared, the surrounding generals burst into an uproar. Their eyes were filled with shock. Clearly, Biao Fei's use of the last move of the giant god technique had surprised them. Zhuowen stepped on the void with his right foot and soared into the sky like a rock. The yellow spike condensed at the tip of his finger was like the sharpest weapon in the world. Bang! As the mountain of flesh descended, Zhuowen pointed with his right finger again. Then he was shocked to find that the yellow spring fingertip could not pierce the mountain of flesh crushing down from the sky. Moreover, the wall of the mountain of flesh was extremely tough. As soon as the yellow spring fingertip touched the surface of the wall of flesh caved in. A terrifying rebound force came, causing Zhuowen to retreat dozens of steps. Hee. And here I thought you were so great. It seems that Lu Jian was careless before, so he was killed by you. Now that you're being crushed by my mountain of flesh, let's see where you can run to. The moment Zhuowen retreated, Biao Fei's complacent laughter was heard. Biao Fei's fear of Zhuowen disappeared the moment he retreated. The other generals around him also heaved a sigh of relief. The wariness in their eyes had also lessened by a lot. After all, LV Jian's death had brought them too much shock. Judging from the current situation, Lu Jian should have died due to carelessness. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been killed so easily by this Shatterer saint. Is that so? Zhuowen's eyes were cold. He smiled coldly. Immediately, 2 of the 9 drops of yellow spring surrounding him flew over and merged into his fingertip. The yellow spike, which was originally only a foot long, extended once more after the 2 drops of yellow springs were infused into it. It was now several feet long. The will of reincarnation was fully displayed at Zhuowen's fingertips. Whoosh! At this moment, the terrifying mountain of flesh swept over and stopped above Zhuowen's head. In the next moment, the mountain of flesh was enough to completely crush Zhuowen. Trash will always be trash. I'm afraid you were lucky to have killed Lu Jian just now. Blood General, you're about to be eliminated. I wonder how you feel now. Qing Kang laughed and stared at the Blood General not far away. However, he was shocked to find that the Blood General's eyes were calm, as if he was not worried at all. Humph! Putting on an act. Qing Kang snorted coldly and whispered. The corner of Blood Demon's mouth curled into an almost imperceptible smile. His senses were much sharper than Qing Kang's. He discovered that the moment the mountain of flesh descended upon Zhuowen's head, the yellow spike at Zhuowen's fingertips became much more powerful than before. Tear it apart. Zhuowen slowly spat out these words. His right fingertip suddenly pierced the flesh wall with a poof. The yellow spike directly pierced the flesh wall and drilled into it. A painful groan was heard. It was Biao Fei. Thump. Zhuo Wen didn't care about the painful javelin at all. He stomped on the ground, and his entire body shot out like an arrow leaving the bow. He followed the wall of flesh and stepped upwards. The moment he rushed out, the yellow spike on his fingertip followed his strength and scratched a terrible wound on the surface of the flesh wall. Crash! A huge gash gushed out from the wound in the flesh wall like a river that had burst its dam. Biao Fei actually let out a miserable scream. His voice was extremely sharp, and from his voice, one could tell just how much pain Biao Fei was in right now. Massacre of the Netherworld. Zhuo Wen's eyes were cold. He instantly rushed to the top of the mountain of flesh. With a thought, the remaining 7 drops around him turned into 7 yellow lightning bolts and drilled into the wound on the flesh wall. The 7 drops of the Netherworld were like the most thirsty wolves. They absorbed the essence chi inside the flesh wall without any scruples. In an instant, the huge mountain of flesh withered at a speed visible to the naked eye. Countless wrinkles appeared on the surface of the flesh wall. In less than 3 breaths of time, the mountain of flesh was only about 10 feet tall, revealing Biao Fei's head and limbs. At this moment, Biao Fei's face was pale and bloodless. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He immediately knelt on the ground and begged Zhuo Wen for mercy. "I know I was wrong. Please let me go. Otherwise, I will really die." Biao Fei could clearly feel that there were 7 forces in his abdomen. They were like a giant whale sucking in water, crazily sucking in the essence chi in his body. He knew very well that when all the essence chi in his abdomen was sucked dry, the essence chi in his head and limbs would also be sucked dry. In the end, he would end up like LV Jian and become a dry corpse. Therefore, Biao Fei immediately put down his dignity as a general and knelt in front of Zhuo Wen to beg for mercy. Chapter 1622. Precise calculation. Zhuo Wen walked forward step by step and finally stopped in front of Biao Fei. His gaze fell on Biao Fei, who was kneeling on the ground with a face twisted in pain. He said indifferently, "When you wanted to treat me like a soft persimmon, did you ever think that you would end up like this? If I, Mu Zhuo, was really just an ordinary fragmented profound saint, I would have been a cold corpse just now. Since you don't value my life as a human life, why should I value your life so much?" As he spoke, Zhuo Wen grabbed Biao Fei's neck with his left hand and lifted him up. The underworld spike on the tip of his right hand slowly pierced towards Biao Fei's forehead. "Stop. The main contestant in this commander-in-chief battle is the general of the Blood Refinement Mansion. You are just a small helper and have no right to kill a general. It's not too late to stop now. Don't make a mistake." A cold and indifferent voice rang out like muffled thunder. The head steward of the Blood Refinement Mansion, Kang Feng, who had originally retreated from the bloody storm, shot over like a shuttle. His speed was extremely fast, akin to a black bolt of lightning. Since the supervisor has made his move, the helper should know when to stop, right? The moment Kang Feng rushed out, the atmosphere in the bloody storm eased a lot. The other generals around him nodded inwardly. Biao Fei, who was held in Zhuo Wen's hand, had a hopeful look in his eyes. At the same time, he was trying his best to resist the terrifying suction force of the 7 drops of underworld in his abdomen. He knew that if he didn't resist the 7 drops of power, his essence chi would be sucked dry before Kang Feng arrived. Zhuo Wen slowly raised his head, his eyes filled with endless indifference. He said indifferently, "Those who respect others will be respected. Those who disrespect others will be given a taste of their own medicine. I, Mu Zhuo, am certain that I did not provoke Biao Fei. However, Biao Fei and his helper, Lu Jian, provoked me and even tried to kill me. Right now, I'm just returning an eye for an eye. Why can't I kill them?" Kang Feng's eyes were cold as he said, "Biao Fei is a general of the blood refining house. You have no official position and are not qualified to kill Biao Fei. If you don't want to die, let him go and kneel on the ground and sincerely apologize. I can spare your life for the sake of the blood general." Zhuo Wen's gaze turned cold. This Kang Feng really thought too highly of himself. Did he really think that he was the only one in charge here? Kneel. Apologize. Zhuowen sneered, but the fingertips of his right hand did not stop, and continued to sweep towards the center of Biafei's brows. You lunatic. Even the chief steward has appeared, and you still dare to kill me? Are you crazy? Do you want to die? Biafei shouted loudly. His face was ferocious. The fear in his heart had reached its peak. That yellow spring's fingertip made him smell the scent of death. He would never forget this scent. How dare you? Kang Feng's face changed slightly. He did not expect Mu Zhuo to be so bold. He had already given his word, but Mu Zhuo still dared to continue to try to kill Biafei. Thinking of this, Kang Feng did not hesitate. His right hand suddenly pulled behind his back, and the giant black spear on his back suddenly appeared in his palm. Kang Feng's right hand suddenly swung, and the giant black spear cut through the air like a shuttle, sweeping towards Zhuowen's vitals like a bolt of lightning. Kai! Kai! The power of this spear was so strong that it actually burst out with extremely dazzling sparks when it swept through the air. The strange sound produced by the friction between the tip of the spear and the air caused the surrounding martial warriors to involuntarily cover their ears. The coldness in Zhuowen's eyes became more and more intense. His right hand was like lightning, and the yellow spring's fingertip instantly sank into the center of Biafei's brows. A stream of blood spurted out from the center of Biafei's brows, completely cutting off Biafei's vitality. As soon as Biafei's vitality was cut off, the 7 drops of yellow springs that Biafei had barely managed to stop instantly sucked Biafei's vitality dry like a whale sucking in water. Biafei's fat body was completely dried up. Biafei's vitality had increased the number of yellow springs by 2 drops. In other words, Zhuowen now had a total of 12 drops of yellow springs. This phenomenon made Zhuowen even more convinced that the increase of yellow springs had nothing to do with one's strength. Instead, it was closely related to the sinfulness of the person killed. Biafei and LV Jian's strength were on par. They were both at the Sky Yin Saint stage, but after LV Jian's death, he could produce 4 drops of yellow springs, while Biafei could only produce 2. This could only mean that LV Jian's sins were more than twice as heavy as Biafei's. The moment Biafei was completely killed by Zhuowen, the countless generals in the surroundings fell into silence. Even the invited guests on the viewing platform outside the square revealed looks of astonishment. The courage of the young man named Mu Zhuo had exceeded everyone's expectations. Kang Feng was the chief steward of the blood-refining mansion and had great authority. Ordinary people would not dare to disobey such an important person. Biafei was a general of the blood-refining mansion and was also one of the higher-ups of the blood-refining mansion. Not only did Mu Zhuo disobey Kang Feng, but he also killed Biafei in front of Kang Feng. This action could be described as bold and reckless. However, Zhuowen did not feel that there was anything wrong with it. As the saying goes, a man of character does not submit to despotic authority. Since he had stepped into the martial world that was full of ups and downs, Zhuowen did not want to be a yes-man and live cautiously. The path of martial arts was originally a narrow path where the brave would emerge victorious. If one was cautious, then one would not be a martial artist, but a schemer. Martial artists sought to be open and aboveboard, magnanimous, taking revenge for revenge, and repaying kindness for kindness. Schemers, on the other hand, were careful, cautious, and unscrupulous. Sometimes, a schemer's power would be far greater than a martial artist's. However, how far could such a person go on the path of martial arts? Zhuowen was very clear that the path of martial arts was never-ending. If one truly had the heart to pursue martial arts, then even the heavens wouldn't be able to stop them. He believed that those who pursued martial arts would always be able to create miracles. In the face of such a situation, perhaps if Zhuowen took a step back, or even bowed his head and apologized, everything would be resolved. However, Zhuowen would not do so because this was not in line with his Tao. If he really did so, he was afraid that he would not be able to go far on the path of martial arts in the future because his heart would lose its sharpness. Thinking of this, Zhuowen's eyes revealed a trace of understanding. A surge of fighting spirit burst out from Zhuowen's body like an awakened beast. Whoosh! The giant black spear was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, it was dozens of meters away from Zhuowen. The giant spear tore through the air, sweeping up a terrifying gale that fell on Zhuowen's body. His shoulder-length hair danced wantonly, and his black robe fluttered loudly. At this moment, Zhuowen's body had an unyielding will. It was as if even if the sky were to fall at this moment, his tall and straight figure would not bend or bow his head. To the ends of the world, to the depths of the yellow springs, Zhuowen pointed his finger at the void. The 12 drops of yellow springs that surrounded him suddenly condensed on his finger. At this moment, Zhuowen's finger seemed to be gilded, emitting a dazzling light. Whoosh! The moment Zhuowen pointed his finger, the giant black spear had already swept in front of Zhuowen. It was very close. At this moment, Zhuowen was extremely calm. The law of the void condensed under his feet. Then, Zhuowen's right foot swept across, his body tilted, and the gilded yellow spring's finger instantly pointed out. Zhuowen grasped it very accurately. Moreover, he did not confront the giant black spear head-on. Since Kang Feng was a saint of the heaven-defying saint stage, Zhuowen's original body was probably no match for him. Of course, if Zhuowen merged the clone of his mastery saint body into his original body, he might be able to compete with Kang Feng. However, after his mastery saint body was separated, the strength of his original body had decreased a lot. With the current strength of Zhuowen's original body, even if he used the 8 types of laws in his body, he would probably only be able to fight with a Sun Sky Saint stage expert. As for a Sky Saint stage expert and a Heaven-defying Saint stage expert, he would have to merge with his Mastery Saint body. However, his Mastery Saint body was currently cultivating with the Golden Lightning body tempering slurry in the Azure Dragon Hall. He really could not come out at the moment. Moreover, Zhuowen did not want to expose the existence of his Mastery Saint body so early. His current main plan was to cultivate the slaughtering underworld finger. This celestial technique was very different from other celestial techniques. At first, it was not very powerful. However, if it was cultivated for a long time, its power would increase by hundreds or thousands. In the end, it might even surpass the level of an ordinary celestial technique. Bang! 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 Zhuowen's underworld finger tapped the body of the giant black spear 3 times in a row. Each time, it contained the reincarnation power of the 12 drops of underworld. After 3 taps, the trajectory of the giant black spear changed by 30 degrees. It swept past a few inches in front of Zhuowen. A fierce wind whistled and lifted Zhuowen's endless long hair and robe. Boom! After the giant black spear changed direction, it directly stabbed into the ground. Then, countless cracks spread out on the ground. The cracks spread out in all directions like a spider web. A terrifying ring-shaped air wave spread out in all directions. The moment the generals who were standing nearby came into contact with the air wave, their pupils shrank. They could not help but step back. They groaned and spat out a mouthful of blood. The aftermath of the spear was also terrifying. However, Mu Zhuo, who was only at the fragmented profound saint realm, had actually dodged the spear that was originally locked on him. What kind of monster was this kid? Zhuowen was not unscathed. At this moment, his feet stepped in the void. He stepped back step by step until he was more than 100 feet away. He barely managed to stop his body. The fingers on his right hand were trembling unnaturally. His face was a little pale. Is it luck? Qing Kang frowned and muttered to himself. On the other hand, Bloodseeker's eyes flickered. He stared straight at Zhuo Wen, feeling even more surprised. Zhuo Wen's strength was somewhat beyond his expectations. Just now, Zhuo Wen's timing had been too accurate. If he had been a step slower or a step faster, he might have been directly pierced by the huge black spear. However, he had chosen the right time to directly point his finger at the weak point of the huge black spear. It was also because of this that the giant black spear was finally hit by Zhuowen's 3 taps in the void. The giant black spear completely deviated from its trajectory and dodged the fatal attack of the vault sheath. The process seemed simple, but it was extremely dangerous. It should be known that this was the full-strength attack of a heaven-defying Saint Realm Saint. Even if the blood demon used all of his trump cards, he would not dare to resist it directly. Chapter 1623. Shui Hentian intervened. Shalai, who had been paying attention to the blood cauldron, narrowed his eyes. He had been paying attention to Kang Feng's spear the moment he made his move. With his cultivation, he could naturally sense that Kang Feng had not held back at all. That spear was powerful enough to kill any saint below the Sun-Sky Saint stage. In Shalai's opinion, Mouju's cultivation base was only at the fragmented profound saint realm, and he would definitely die under the spear. Even if Mouju's strength was extraordinary and he was able to kill Biao Fei, Shalai did not think that he would be able to survive under the spear. However, reality had given him a tight slap in the face. Mouju had relied on his precise calculations and keen senses to find the weak point of the giant black spear. Furthermore, he had used his own strength to blow the giant black spear away from its trajectory. Although Shalai did not see the power that Mouju used, Mouju's keen senses and precise calculations, as well as his superb battle awareness, made Shalai have a whole new level of respect for him. Shalai knew that Mouju's current cultivation was too low. If they were at the same cultivation level, Shalai knew that Mouju would definitely be an extremely strong opponent given his battle awareness. Whoosh! A black shadow suddenly rushed over and landed beside the giant black spear that was stuck in the ground. He reached out his right hand and grabbed the handle of the giant black spear. Kang Feng pulled out his giant black spear as he coldly stared at Shui when in the distance. A sliver of astonishment surfaced in his heart. He never imagined that this kid would actually be able to dodge his fatal spear attack. This young man's battle awareness is very strong. However, he looks very unfamiliar. I can't recognize him at all. Shui Hentian, who was sitting on the high seat, stared at Zhuowen with burning eyes. Originally, he had not taken Zhuowen seriously with his arcane-shattering saint stage cultivation level. However, the scene just now was so amazing that even Shui Hentian could not help but be amazed. Many of the guests in the elevated seats were also discussing Mouju's origin. Of course, the conclusion was that Mouju's origin was mysterious. Very well. You actually dared to kill Biao Fei in front of me. Do you not place me, Blade Vault, in your eyes at all? Kang Feng's eyes were crimson red, making him look exceptionally demonic. He walked step by step towards Zhuowen, as an aura erupted from his body like a volcano. This aura was very terrifying. The pressure in the surrounding blood-red storm seemed to be dispelled by this aura. Haha, Brother Blood General, your helper is really audacious. He dared to kill Biao Fei in front of the director. This is an act of contempt for the director, Qing Kang said in a neutral tone. Shui Mo frowned slightly. He cupped his hands in the direction of Kang Feng and said in a clear voice, Director, Brother Mu is my helper. Moreover, he is a newcomer to the blood-refining mansion. It is pardonable that he does not know the rules of the mansion. I hope that the director can be magnanimous and forgive Brother Mu this time. Shui Mo's words were watertight, saving Kang Feng a lot of face. He also said that Zhuowen was a newcomer, so the newborn calf was not afraid of the tiger. All of this was pardonable. However, Kang Feng coldly glanced at Shui Mo and said indifferently, if there are no rules, nothing can be accomplished. Just now, I've already reminded Mouju not to kill people with a general position. Not only did he turn a deaf ear, he even killed Biao Fei in front of me. This is a provocation to me, to the blood-refining manor, and to the blood-refining manor. If we do not get rid of this man today, where will the prestige of the blood-refining mansion go in the future? After saying this, Kang Feng did not stop walking. He walked step by step toward Zhuowen. With every step he took, the aura on his body rose. Zhuowen frowned slightly. He saw the yellow at his fingertips turn back into 12 drops of yellow springs which lingered around his body. Kang Feng was very strong. The heaven-defying saint stage gave him a lot of pressure. Zhuowen knew that with the current strength of his body, he was no match for Kang Feng unless he summoned his saint body. It seems that Kang Feng will not give up. It seems that I can only let the external incarnation of the saint body merge with my body. Zhuowen sighed. With a thought, he He planned to awaken the saint body that was still refining the golden lightning body tempering slurry in the Azure Dragon Hall and let it merge with his body. However, before he could summon the saint body, Mansion Master Hentian, who had been sitting in a high position, suddenly stood up. Hentian looked down at the people below and suddenly said, "Kang Feng, stop. Since Mu Zhuo is new here, it's fine if he doesn't know the rules, but don't hinder the first stage." Kang Feng paused and turned to look at Hentian, who was sitting in a high position. He then looked at Zhuowen, who was on high alert not far away. His eyes were filled with unwillingness. In the end, he took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "Mansion Master, I understand." After he finished speaking, Kang Feng shot a hateful glare at Zhuowen, before leaping out of the bloody storm. After leaving the bloody storm, Kang Feng said in a clear voice, "There is still half an incense stick's worth of time before the bloody storm disappears. Everyone, hurry up." Since Mansion Master Hentian had stepped in, Kang Feng naturally did not say anything. When the other generals heard that there was only half an incense stick's worth of time left, they all got busy and continued to walk toward the center of the bloody storm with their helpers. Of course, after the incident with Biao Fei, no one dared to provoke Mu Zhuo anymore. After all, this guy dared to kill a general right in front of Kang Feng. Moreover, this person's strength was extraordinary. Although he was only at the fragmented profound saint stage, he was still able to survive Kang Feng's spear. His strength was not to be underestimated. Zhuowen looked at Hentian, who had suddenly stepped in, strangely. Speaking of which, Kang Feng should be Hentian's most loyal subordinate. Since Hentian had already given Kang Feng full authority for the commander battle, it was clear that Hentian trusted Kang Feng. This also meant that he would not interfere in the commander battle. But now, Hentian had stepped in for him, a person with no background. This made Zhuowen feel that it was strange. However, Zhuowen soon noticed the blood demon in the center of the bloody storm. He saw that the blood demon's eyes were faintly looking at Hentian, who was sitting in the high position. Although this glance was very ordinary, it was extremely unusual in Zhuowen's eyes. It seems that the blood demon has some relationship with Hentian. The reason why Hentian stepped in for me should be because of the blood demon. When he thought of this, Zhuowen became more and more afraid of the blood demon. He knew that the blood demon was supported by a force. This force was either related to Hentian or strong enough to make Hentian fear it. That was why Hentian was willing to give the blood demon face. From these clues, Zhuowen immediately guessed that the blood demon was not interested in being the general of the blood refining mansion. His goal was probably to enter the blood refining deity's pond during the commander battle. After thinking through all this, Zhuowen's gaze calmed down. He knew that if his guess was correct, his life would be very safe during the commander battle because the blood demon would not let anything happen to him. Of course, if the commander battle ended, the blood demon would not care about his life or death. At that time, he would be in a dangerous situation. After all, he had offended the blood refining mansion's general manager. Kang Feng would not let him off so easily. However, Zhuowen was not afraid. He knew very well that once his saint physique completely refined the golden lightning body tempering slurry, his saint physique would rise to another level. At that time, even a heaven-defying saint stage expert might not be able to kill him. Of course, if he could successfully help the blood demon obtain the position of the commander battle, he would be able to enter the blood refining deity's pond. At that time, if he broke through to the heavenly yin saint stage, his strength would increase by leaps and bounds. Coupled with his saint physique, he would be able to compete with a heaven-defying saint stage expert. However, I should increase the power of the slaughtering netherworld finger first. Zhuowen's eyes flickered as he slowly walked toward the center of the bloody storm. The 12 drops of netherworld finger around him were supported by the void law. They shuttled back and forth in the air like 12 bolts of lightning. What's going on? The resentment in the bloody storm is diminishing. Suddenly, the other generals in the bloody storm quickly noticed something strange. This was because they realized that the resentment that could affect their minds was much less than before. It's Mu Zhuo. Look, the strange yellow water droplets around Mu Zhuo seem to be absorbing the resentment. Many of the generals noticed Mu Zhuo as he slowly walked over, especially when they noticed that along the way, countless vengeful spirits retreated. Many of them were even forced to retreat into the center of the bloody storm by the flashing yellow water droplets. With this discovery, some generals gathered behind Zhuoan. This was because there was no resentment behind Zhuoan, which saved them a lot of trouble. Of course, those who were willing to follow behind Zhuoan were generals with average strength. As for the stronger generals, they had a sense of pride in their hearts and did not want to be associated with others. Instead, they relied on their own strength to force their way into the center of the bloody storm. Zhuoan naturally noticed the group of generals following behind him, but he ignored them. At this moment, he was concentrating on controlling the netherworld finger to constantly capture the resentment. When Zhuoan absorbed all the resentment in the bloody storm, the number of netherworld finger droplets had reached 20, and the time it took for an incense stick to burn had almost passed. "It's time to enter," Zhuoan muttered in a low voice as he stepped into the 100-meter radius of the bloody storm. The generals behind Zhuoan also cautiously stepped into the 100-meter radius of the bloody storm. However, after entering the center of the bloody storm, these generals immediately retreated and put some distance between themselves and Zhuoan. Their eyes were filled with complex emotions. They knew very well that if Mu Zhuo had not absorbed the resentment, they would not have been able to enter the 100-meter radius of the bloody storm so easily. Chapter 1624. The second stage, an incense stick of time, has passed. Manager Kang Feng shouted. Immediately, the bloody storm that soared into the sky and swept across the area dissipated with a loud bang. The blood refinement square also returned to its original tranquility. The figures of the many generals standing in the center of the bloody storm were completely revealed. Zhuoan looked around. There were originally 108 generals, but now there were only 40 generals left. Even with their helpers, there were only 80 generals left standing in the square. The pressure and resentment produced by striking the blood cauldron 10 times was truly terrifying. It had directly eliminated more than half of the generals. Of course, those who were able to withstand such pressure and resentment and reach the center of the bloody storm were all elites among the 108 generals. The remaining 80 generals and helpers were basically all above the Yin Sky Saint stage. Their strength could not be underestimated. Many of the guests on the viewing platform nodded their heads repeatedly. Although they had not personally experienced the terror of the blood-colored storm, they could tell just how powerful it was just by looking at the appearance of the blood-colored storm. Congratulations to all generals for successfully passing the first stage, Blood's Resentment. General Manager Kang Feng looked around and coldly stared at Zhuowen. Then, he turned away as if nothing had happened and said in a loud voice, "Next up is the second stage. The rules of the second stage are very simple. That is, everyone has to strike the blood cauldron. 5 strikes from the blood cauldron is a pass, 10 strikes is a genius, 15 strikes is a monster, and 20 strikes is a heaven's pride. Among the many experts in the blood refinement mansion, only the mansion master can be called a heaven's pride." At this point, Kang Feng's voice was slightly raised. At the same time, he respectfully bowed in the direction of Xue Hentian from afar to show his respect. Kang Feng's action was quite beautiful. Not only did he clearly explain the rules of the second stage, he also flattered Xue Hentian a little. Naturally, Xue Hentian enjoyed Kang Feng's flattery. He raised his head slightly and revealed a smug smile. "Everyone, if you want to pass the second stage, you have to strike the blood cauldron at least 5 times. Otherwise, you will be eliminated. Of course, the rules are similar this time. The general and the helper must both pass. If one of them fails, then both of them will be eliminated. If both of them pass, the one with the higher score will be the final score." After Kang Feng finished speaking, no one objected. It was obvious that everyone agreed with the rules set by Kang Feng. For the second round, let the contestant I've personally selected come up to the stage. As he spoke, Kang Feng's sharp eyes scanned the crowd in the square. Then, he suddenly pointed at a skinny man in green armor and said, "Qing Ning, you go first this time." Qing Ning is above average among the 108 generals. Among these 40 people, his strength is not bad. It shouldn't be a problem for him to knock 5 times, but more than 5 times is a bit difficult. Zhuowen and Blood Devil stood side by side. Blood Devil secretly transmitted his voice to Zhuowen, telling him about Qing Ning's situation. Qing Ning stood in front of the blood cauldron. His green eyes were like the eyes of a ghost, looking extremely ferocious. He did not immediately approach the blood cauldron. Instead, he took a deep breath and slowly mobilized the saint force in his body. After 5 breaths, Qing Ning suddenly stepped forward and instantly swept to the front of the blood cauldron. Qing Ning's hands turned into snake fists and instantly stretched out like pythons. As they streaked across the air, there was a strange hissing sound. His green strength erupted and turned into a huge green snake. Ding! Qing Ning's fist landed on the blood cauldron. A crisp sound rang out, and an invisible wave spread out from the cauldron. The invisible wave, like ripples in water, flowed along Qing Ning's arm and directly rushed into the depths of his body. Qing Ning's body trembled and his face turned slightly pale. However, Qing Ning did not retreat. He stepped to the side with his right foot and his ready left fist once again landed on the blood cauldron. This time, Qing Ning consecutively hit the blood cauldron twice. The 2 cauldron sounds overlapped and exploded in the square like muffled thunder. It was deafening. Qing Ning frowned and his face became paler and paler. He roared and braced himself against the terrifying ripples created by the 2 terrifying sounds of the blood cauldron. His right hand instantly swept out and hit the blood cauldron again. Crash! The moment the 4th cauldron sound came, an extremely terrifying pressure crushed down. Qing Ning's face changed drastically and he actually took a few steps back with a grunt. The pressure was like air pressure, spreading out like a gust of wind. It blew Qing Ning's long green hair, making him look extraordinarily mighty. That's the 4th hit. Qing Ning only needs 1 more to pass. Many people were moved. 1,000 green snake shadow. Qing Ning snorted coldly and took a step forward. His hands were like 2 snake heads. Suddenly, green strength surged up from his body. In an instant, countless green snake shadows swept out as if there were 10,000 snakes coming out of their holes. Snake rule? Zhuo Wen's eyes narrowed slightly. He could clearly feel a strange power of law in Qing Ning's saint energy. This law was actually the serpent law. It was because of this serpent law that Qing Ning's attacks carried the shadow of a snake. Moreover, the snake shadows were not simple. When they were attached to Qing Ning's attacks, it was enough to increase his attack power by hundreds and thousands. It was extremely terrifying. Ding! Qing Ning withstood the terrifying pressure and relied on the countless snake shadows to go against the flow. In an instant, his right fist was like lightning as it violently slammed on the surface of the blood cauldron. Suddenly, a clear cauldron sound was heard. When the blood cauldron was knocked for the 5th time, a pressure that could topple mountains and overturn seas came whistling over. Immediately, a bloody aura spat out. It was like a bloody fog that covered the area dozens of feet around the blood cauldron. Puff! The 5th cauldron sound was too terrifying, especially with the addition of the blood mist. Qing Ning could not withstand the terrifying pressure at all. He spat out a mouthful of blood and was directly sent flying. After flying a few hundred meters away, Qing Ning's right foot stomped on the void. His entire body twisted like a snake and he landed on the ground in a rather sorry state. 5 hits. Qing Ning passes. Your helper, step forward. Kang Feng said indifferently. Qing Ning sighed lightly, but his eyes were slightly furrowed as he looked at his helper. His helper was a middle-aged man. Although the middle-aged man was also at the Yin Sky Saint stage, Qing Ning knew very well that his helper's strength was slightly weaker than his. Therefore, Qing Ning was a little worried that his helper would not be able to successfully hit the cauldron 5 times. Qing Ning's helper stepped forward, but the middle-aged man looked rather reserved, or rather, a little nervous. Zhuowen could even see that the middle-aged man's feet were trembling unnaturally, which surprised Zhuowen. Let's begin. The middle-aged man nodded and took a step forward. Black energy condensed in his palm, and then he struck the blood cauldron with his palm. In an instant, the middle-aged man struck 3 consecutive times above the sound of the blood cauldron. Bang! 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 The 3 sounds of the cauldron converged layer by layer, like a tsunami that shook the heavens. Then, like a waterfall from the 9 heavens, it flowed down and rumbled as it fell. The pressure was as if the entire sky was about to explode. Kang Feng stared at the middle-aged man in surprise and then shook his head. The middle-aged man was too nervous. He actually struck 3 consecutive times at the beginning. One had to know that even Qing Ning did not dare to strike 3 times at the beginning. After all, the pressure created by the 3 strikes was too terrifying. Even Qing Ning might not be able to withstand it, let alone Qing Ning's helper. Is this idiot courting death? Qing Ning's face turned ugly, and he could not help but curse. The middle-aged man finally panicked. He realized that he had done a very stupid thing, which was to strike 3 times at the beginning. But now, even if he regretted it, it was already too late. Because that terrifying pressure that was like the collapse of the heavens had already completely crushed down. The middle-aged man roared angrily. The black energy in his body whistled out like an angry dragon and covered his entire body like a thick black armor. Poochie. Unfortunately, just as the middle-aged man finished setting up his defense, the pressure had already descended and landed heavily on the middle-aged man's body. Then, the middle-aged man spat out a mouthful of blood, and the black energy defense around his body collapsed. Bang! Then, the middle-aged man was violently thrown out. Because of the terrifying pressure, the middle-aged man's body continued to spurt out blood as he flew backward. He looked extremely miserable. In the end, the middle-aged man crashed thousands of meters away. After struggling for a while, he simply fainted. Kang Feng shook his head and said indifferently, "Qing Ning is eliminated." When he said this, many people around looked at Qing Ning with a trace of pity. Qing Ning had struck the cauldron 5 times with great difficulty, but in the end, because of the helper's incompetence, he was eliminated just like that. He was really unlucky. Qing Ning's face turned green. He coldly glanced at the unconscious middle-aged man, and then immediately left the square. At this moment, Qing Ning's mood was like thousands of grass-mud horses galloping past. He had clearly passed, but because of the helper's helplessness, he was eliminated. Next, Aodi. Kang Feng's face was calm as he continued to announce the next contestant's name. As Kang Feng announced the number, one by one, the generals stepped out and began to strike the blood cauldron. Naturally, some people were happy, while others were sad. Qing Kang, step forward. Kang Feng suddenly announced a name that attracted the attention of many generals. Qing Kang, who was dressed in green armor and had long hair, slowly walked up. Qing Kang's appearance naturally attracted the attention of many people. After all, he was the second general, and his strength was extraordinary. With Qing Kang's strength, 10 strikes shouldn't be a problem. Maybe even 15. The moment Qing Kang appeared, a storm of discussion broke out. Everyone was guessing what kind of strength Qing Kang had. Qing Kang stood upright. He did not make any preparations at all. He immediately took a step forward and swept to the front of the blood cauldron. Then, he struck 3 times in a row with his right hand. Bang! 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 3 consecutive sounds of the cauldron rang out in the square. Everyone in the square was in an uproar. Qing Kang knew that the middle-aged man had struck the cauldron 3 times in a row, but he still followed suit. Chapter 1625. Wager the 3 cauldron sounds overlapped, and the pressure was like the roar of a furious dragon. A heaven-shattering pressure came crashing down. Qing Kang stood proudly, his long hair fluttering in the wind. The pressure came crashing down, but Qing Kang was like a boulder, unmoving. As expected of Qing Kang. After 3 consecutive knocks, the overlaid pressure did not affect him at all. Qing Kang's unbridled attitude immediately moved many of the guests present. There were even many female martial artists whose beautiful eyes flickered with radiance as they revealed radiant expressions. Qing Kang laughed. Before the overlaid pressure from the 3 cauldron sounds dissipated, he moved again. His 5 fingers quickly pointed out, and a green force flew out like a shuttle, turning into countless green sword auras. Bang bang! The green aura moved like a sword, and with a clang, it pressed against the surface of the blood cauldron. Immediately, two deafening cauldron sounds rang out again. Along with the cauldron sounds, the surface of the blood cauldron exploded with a rich blood aura. At this moment, the pressure around the blood cauldron was uncontrollable, and a blood-colored air wave spread out in a ring shape. The eyes of the nearby generals shrunk, and they involuntarily took a few steps back. The 5 knocks were the dividing line of the blood cauldron. Once 5 knocks were made, the blood cauldron would spew out a bloody aura. With the support of the bloody aura, the pressure of the blood cauldron increased by several times. This was also why Qing Ning was in such a sorry state after 5 knocks. When the bloody aura and the pressure fell on his body, Qing Kang's eyes shrunk involuntarily, and his knees bent slightly. Although the angle was very small, the people around him still noticed it. There was no doubt that the pressure of the blood cauldron had undergone a qualitative change after 5 knocks. Qing Kang took a deep breath, and his right foot moved. His right thumb pinched his index finger, and then he quickly switched to his middle finger, followed by his ring finger, and then his little finger. After repeating this several times, the green aura between his 5 fingers was like a giant tree, and it suddenly erupted. At this moment, Qing Kang's aura became as vast as the ocean, and it was terrifying enough to topple mountains and overturn seas. Qing Kang pointed out again, and this time, his finger was as sharp as a sword. Bang! The 6th cauldron chime rang out, and the blood energy in the surroundings began to churn violently. It spread from a few dozen feet to over 30 feet. The blood energy churned as if it had transformed into a terrifying beast that was roaring wantonly. Cracks began to appear on the ground around the blood cauldron. Qing Kang frowned slightly, his face slightly pale as he took 2 steps back. However, Qing Kang roared and took 2 more steps forward. The 5 fingers on his right hand kept changing. The cyan energy turned into countless sword chi. Qing Kang quickly pointed at the blood cauldron twice. Bang bang! The 2 cauldron sounds were getting scarier and scarier. As they stacked together, the blood chi rumbled even more violently. It turned into a gigantic beast that roared out. A gigantic invisible beast claw slashed down from the blood chi, as though it wanted to crush Qing Kang to death. Poochie! Qing Kang's expression changed slightly and he spat out a mouthful of blood. The moment the beast claw came down, he pointed his right hand towards the sky and sword chi filled the sky. Instantly, countless cyan sword shadows appeared in the sky and surrounded Qing Kang. Rumble! The 2 attacks collided. Qing Kang retreated several dozen meters, but the invisible beast claw did not give up. Qing Kang roared and pointed his left hand. Suddenly, more cyan energy surged out of Qing Kang's body. The cyan energy took the shape of swords and they looked like sharp cyan swords. Zhuoan knew from Blood Demon that Qing Kang cultivated the law of the cyan sword. The cyan energy in his body contained dense sword chi that could be turned into sword chi at any time. It was extremely sharp and powerful. 10,000 swords into one. Qing Kang looked serious. He put his 10 fingers together and the endless cyan sword chi merged together to form a gigantic sword that was a few hundred meters long. Slash! Qing Kang pointed his right finger at the void. Suddenly, the gigantic cyan sword slashed down and the invisible beast claw collapsed. Even the blood chi above the blood cauldron tumbled recklessly under the impact of the gigantic sword's sword chi. It showed signs of dissipating. Qing Kang's cyan sword technique has been cultivated to such a level. No wonder he was so confident before. Blood Demon frowned and his voice was filled with fear. Kang Feng slowly opened his eyes and nodded at Qing Kang with a satisfied look on his face. The 9th sound. Qing Kang snorted. He stomped his right foot on the ground and leaped up to the hilt of the gigantic sword. He twisted his waist in the air and kicked the hilt with his left foot. Swoosh! The gigantic cyan sword was like a flash of cyan lightning. It tore through the void and slammed into the blood cauldron with a terrifying power. Bang! The sword arrived and the blood cauldron rumbled. The blood chi in the sky condensed into a gigantic blood exotic beast. It fell from the sky and grabbed at the gigantic cyan sword. Slash again. However, Qing Kang was not afraid at all. He completely ignored the blood-colored exotic beast and took the risk to direct the giant green sword to fall and hit the blood cauldron violently. The 10th sound rang out leisurely. Then, the wind and clouds in the sky changed. The blood-colored beast suddenly rushed over and slammed its claw on the giant green sword. Then, its blood aura expanded and turned into a terrifying blood fog. Within the blood fog, a terrifying resentment rushed down like lightning. The gigantic cyan sword was quite powerful. The blood exotic beast was indeed powerful, but it could not do anything to the sword. However, the resentment spirit from the blood mist was much more terrifying than the blood exotic beast. It was like maggots that clung to the bones and instantly covered the area around the gigantic cyan sword. Soon, the gigantic cyan sword collapsed under the influence of the resentment spirit. Qing Kang spat out a mouthful of blood as pain and malevolence filled his face. He retreated until he reached the edge of the square before stopping. His eyes were filled with fear as he looked at the blood cauldron. 10 times, Qing Kang really hit the cauldron 10 times. How terrifying. 10 hits is enough to be called a genius. Qing Kang is indeed the second general. Just 10 hits from the blood cauldron is enough to dominate the other generals. The moment Qing Kang hit the cauldron for the 10th time, the crowd burst into an uproar. Qing Kang was the first general to hit the cauldron 10 times. Qing Kang, you've hit the blood cauldron 10 times. You're promoted. Kang Feng nodded at Qing Kang with a look of admiration. Qing Kang took a deep breath and calmed the boiling blood qi in his body. He cupped his hands at Kang Feng and walked down the square. He walked up to Blood Demon and said mockingly, "Blood General, 10 hits should be nothing to you." Blood Demon narrowed his eyes and said indifferently, "Qing Kang, you talk a lot today." Qing Kang's eyes turned cold. He said coldly, "Blood Demon, do you dare to make a bet with me?" Blood Demon raised his eyebrows and looked at Qing Kang. "A bet?" "Yes. In this second round, we will compete based on the results. If I, Qing Kang, win, I want you to hand over your dog to me. If I, Qing Kang, lose, I will not fight for the position of Commander-in-Chief for you. On the contrary, I will help you win the position of Commander-in-Chief." Qing Kang's voice wasn't soft, or it could be said that Qing Kang deliberately raised his voice and pointed at Zhuoan provocatively. Qing Kang's words immediately attracted the attention of the surrounding generals. Even the guests on the dugger heard it clearly. In an instant, discussions broke out. Kang Feng stood proudly not far from the blood cauldron. He naturally noticed Qing Kang's challenge to Blood Demon, but he didn't step in to stop it. In an instant, countless gazes gathered on Qing Kang and Blood Demon. Of course, there were also many gazes that fell on Zhuoan beside Blood Demon. From Qing Kang's words, everyone could see that Qing Kang was targeting Blood Demon's helper, Mu Zhuo. Blood Demon frowned slightly and hesitated. Qing Kang had knocked on the blood cauldron 10 times. In Blood Demon's eyes, such a result was extremely amazing. Even though Blood Demon was quite confident in himself, he wasn't sure if he could knock on the blood cauldron 10 times. Thinking of this, Blood Demon looked at the calm young man beside him and couldn't help but ask, "Brother Mu, what do you think of this? If you feel that it's inappropriate, I'll reject it immediately." Qing Kang frowned slightly. He didn't expect Blood Demon to consult Mu Zhuo. Although Mu Zhuo had some tricks up his sleeve, his cultivation was only at the arcane shattering saint stage. He might be able to deal with a Sky Yin Saint stage expert, but he would definitely be unable to deal with a Sky Yang Saint stage expert. However, Blood Demon was so cautious with Mu Zhuo, which made Qing Kang feel strange. Even the other generals were surprised when they saw this scene. Zhuoan stared at Qing Kang indifferently and grinned. That smile looked rather cold as he said, "Since General Qing Kang is so kind, I won't reject it. If you want to bet, I'll accompany you. However, the bet has to be changed. If you, Qing Kang, win, I, Mu Zhuo, will give my life to you and you can do whatever you want with it. If you, Qing Kang, lose, I want one of your arms and help General Blood Demon ascend to the position of commander. How about it?" As soon as these words were spoken, the surroundings instantly fell into silence. Many people looked at Zhuoan who stood proudly with strange gazes. They were truly unable to imagine that this kid would actually agree to Qing Kang's bet and even shamelessly change the terms of the bet. Qing Kang stared at Zhuowen and pondered for a while before nodding. Okay. I, Qing Kang, accept this bet. Then I hope General Qing Kang won't deny it when you lose, Zhuowen said indifferently. Qing Kang sneered. Don't worry, I won't deny it. However, I think you should be more concerned about your life. You only have a short period of time to live. General Qing Kang doesn't need to worry about that. I, Mu Zhuo, will live well. Zhuowen said and no longer paid attention to Qing Kang. Qing Kang narrowed his eyes and sneered as he crossed his arms and looked at the blood cauldron. At this moment, Qing Kang's helper went up. Qing Kang's helper was an ugly old man with pustules all over his face. This old man wasn't weak as he actually knocked on the blood cauldron 8 times. Chapter 1626. Stonebreaker's entrance. After Azure Firmament, other generals stepped onto the stage. However, most of them were disheveled. They weren't able to ring the blood cauldron 5 times and were sadly eliminated. And the ones that everyone paid attention to were Yarrow Lian and Demon Shine. Demon Shine's result was quite good, ringing the blood cauldron 8 times. As for Demon Shine's helper, he also managed to ring the blood cauldron 8 times. As for Yarrow Lian's result, many people's eyes brightened. His final result was a total of 9 rings. Moreover, these 9 rings weren't from Yarrow Lian himself, but from his helper. As for Yarrow Lian himself, he had only managed to ring the blood cauldron 8 times, the same as Demon Shine. However, his helper was extraordinary. He had actually managed to ring the blood cauldron 9 times. Zhuowen's eyes fell on Yarrow Lian's helper. This helper was extremely short and his entire body was covered in a black robe, making it impossible to see his true appearance. However, Zhuowen could feel that this short man wasn't simple at all. If he wasn't wrong, then this short man should have been holding back a certain amount of his strength just now. Stonebreaker, step forward. After Yarrow Lian's helper retreated, Kang Feng shouted out in a loud voice, while Shalai's name completely attracted the attention of countless people. Even the first commander, who had his eyes closed, slowly opened them at this moment. His eyes shined like torches as they focused on Stonebreaker. First commander, how many times do you think Stonebreaker will be able to ring the blood cauldron? The second commander sitting beside the first commander suddenly asked. The other 4 commanders seated on the high seats also looked at the first commander. As commanders, they were naturally well aware of the talent and strength of the first general, Shalai. With the strength that Stonebreaker has displayed over the years, the truth is that he already has the qualifications to be promoted to commander. It's just that the blood refining mansion can only have 8 commanders, and this has never changed since time immemorial. In addition, Stonebreaker has never taken the initiative to challenge a commander, thus he has always been a general. The other commanders also began to whisper amongst themselves. Their evaluation of Stonebreaker was quite high. At the same time, this was the first time that 6 commanders were discussing a single general. From this, it could be seen just how important Stonebreaker was in the hearts of these commanders. The first commander's eyes were calm, like an ancient well without any ripples. He looked at Stonebreaker and pondered for a moment, then said in a hoarse voice, if Stonebreaker uses all his strength, he might be able to ring the blood cauldron 15 times. After saying this, the first commander narrowed his eyes once more. The other 5 commanders looked at each other in shock. They knew the temperament of the first commander. He was extremely cold and indifferent. Even in front of the mansion master, the first commander would not show any other expression. Was Stonebreaker's? Was Stonebreaker's Stonebreaker? Stonebreaker was Stonebreaker? Dressed in rock armor, Rockbreak slowly stood up and walked onto the plaza step by step. His gait was like a dragon or a tiger. His footsteps seemed to follow a strange rhythm that made one's heart beat faster. When Shalai finally stood in front of the blood cauldron, countless gazes gathered on his figure. Even Kang Feng's eyes sparkled as he stared at Shalai, a look of admiration on his face. Stone crack, I wonder how many times he can attack. Qing Kang furrowed his brows, feeling uncertain. His results were the best so far, but he knew that if Stonebreaker made a move, his results would be surpassed. This was because Stonebreaker was the first general. Qing Kang had been a general for almost 1,000 years. However, in the past 1,000 years, he had never had the courage to challenge Stonebreaker. He didn't even have the courage to fight for the title of first general. This was because the Stonebreaker in front of him was too powerful. He was so powerful that he didn't dare to challenge him. Let's begin. Kang Feng's eyes lit up. He took a few steps back and gestured to Stonebreaker. This was the first time Kang Feng had treated a general so politely. However, the others didn't feel anything wrong. This was because Stonebreaker was indeed very powerful. He was so powerful that even Kang Feng didn't dare to underestimate him. Not only was Stonebreaker at the Sky Saint stage, but it was also said that Stonebreaker's battle prowess was exceptionally terrifying. Stonebreaker had once challenged Kang Feng. It was said that during that battle, Stonebreaker had fought Kang Feng for 100 rounds and lost in the end. However, Stonebreaker's defeat was glorious. He had challenged Kang Feng, who was a Sky Saint stage expert. Not only did he not lose instantly, but he had fought Kang Feng for 100 rounds before losing. He was definitely a monstrous existence. It was this battle that had established Stonebreaker's reputation as the first general. This was also the reason why Qing Kang didn't dare to challenge Stonebreaker. It was also the reason why Kang Feng treated Stonebreaker so politely. Stonebreaker nodded. He took a step forward and threw out a punch. This punch was ordinary, but it brought with it a terrifying howling wind. However, when the punch approached the blood cauldron, it was as if he was hammering a pile. He quickly struck the cauldron. Bang! 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 Suddenly, the sound of 4 cauldrons rang out clearly. 4 waves of pressure soared into the sky and came crashing down. Crack! A wave of air whizzed out in all directions like an angry dragon. The ground of the square, with the blood cauldron as the center, began to crack. The dense rocks seemed to have lost their gravity as they floated into the air. Nearly a third of the square had been turned into ruins under the pressure of this pressure. Stonebreaker stood in front of the blood cauldron like a long spear. As the pressure descended, his long hair and sleeves danced in the wind. However, Stonebreaker was as steady as Mount Tai. 4 cauldrons at the same time, but he still withstood the pressure of the 4 cauldrons. This Stonebreaker is really arrogant, but he has the right to be arrogant. When the pressure of the 4 cauldrons had destroyed 1/3 of the square, countless people around the square stood up in shock. Stonebreaker lived up to his name as the first general. He had shocked everyone with his first move. The 4 cauldrons were much more amazing than Qing Kang's 3 cauldrons. Moreover, under the pressure of the 4 cauldrons, Stonebreaker was as steady as Mount Tai. This made many people look at him in a new light. 4 cauldrons at the same time, Qing Kang's body trembled as he stared at Stonebreaker. He took a deep breath, but his heart couldn't calm down for a long time. Is this Stonebreaker? Blood Demon had a complicated look in his eyes. If it was Qing Kang, he might be able to compete with him. However, Stonebreaker was like an insurmountable mountain. Blood Demon didn't have the courage to compete with him. Zhuowen stood tall. His eyes weren't on Stonebreaker, but on the blood cauldron and the cauldron's cauldron sounds. From the beginning, he had noticed the difference in the cauldron's cauldron sounds. He could vaguely feel that the cauldron's cauldron sounds contained pain, anger, resentment, and other emotions. The pressure, blood qi, and resentment from the blood cauldron seemed to be the cauldron's way of venting these negative emotions. This cauldron has a spirit and it contains emotions. It is venting its emotions. Zhuowen's eyes were blurred. He looked past Blood Demon, Vault Sheath, Stonebreaker, and finally at the blood cauldron. He could feel the anger and helplessness in the cauldron's cauldron sounds. Blood Demon seemed to have noticed Zhuowen's strange behavior. He couldn't help but cast a sidelong glance at Zhuowen. His eyes revealed a pondering look. Qing Kang also noticed Zhuowen. However, he sneered and thought disdainfully, looks like Mu Zhuo is scared stiff. However, after the 4 cauldron sounds gradually dissipated, Stonebreaker threw another punch. This time, his fist landed on the surface of the blood cauldron. He threw 3 consecutive punches. Instantly, the 3 cauldron sounds overlapped and blood chi shot up from the cauldron's mouth. This time, when the 3 cauldron sounds overlapped, it was like the echoes of an empty valley, resounding endlessly in everyone's ears. Many of the weaker cultivators could not help but cover their ears. Not long after the 3 cauldron sounds rang out, Shalai's face was expressionless. His left fist, which had been waiting to strike, was thrown out once again. He actually threw out 3 punches in one go. In an instant, the blood cauldron was knocked 10 times. Crash! The cauldron sounds, blood chi, and resentment instantly gathered in the sky, forming an extremely terrifying pressure. These 3 forces continued to churn and converge. Finally, they formed a huge and terrifying blood dragon. The blood dragon roared at the sky. With a furious roar, it suddenly swooped down and swept towards Stonebreaker. Its bloody mouth was filled with the stench of blood and it unceremoniously swallowed Stonebreaker whole. What a terrifying blood dragon! Stonebreaker is too arrogant. The first 3 cauldron sounds haven't dissipated and he immediately hit the 83 cauldron sounds. It's really, this blood dragon has gathered the pressure, blood chi, and resentment of the blood cauldron. The energy it contains is extremely terrifying. Although Stonebreaker is strong, I'm afraid it won't be easy for him to take on this attack. The impact of the blood-red dragon was too great. Everyone could feel that if they were to face the blood-red dragon, they would die without a doubt. Hence, many warriors began to worry for Stonebreaker. After all, the blood dragon was too strong. Although Stonebreaker was strong, it wouldn't be easy for him to take on this blood dragon. Stonebreaker's gaze was as calm as water. He suddenly raised his right hand above his head. After which, he clenched his fist and roared, "Wind, thunder, rain, snow, 4 mountains, descend." After he finished speaking, 4 enormous illusory mountains came crushing down from the 4 directions around the rock crack. Among the 4 mountains, one was howling with wind, one was flashing with lightning, one was pouring with rain, and one was filled with snowflakes. The 4 mountains represented 4 different sceneries. At the instant the 4 mountains descended, a frightening sealing power erupted from the 4 mountains. The moment the Crimson Dragon rushed into the 4 mountains, the 4 energies of wind, thunder, rain, and snow suddenly exploded. Immediately, the Crimson Dragon stopped in mid-air. Stonebreaker didn't even look at the blood dragon. Soon after, he slowly walked towards the blood cauldron and said indifferently, "Explode." Rumble. The blood-red dragon suddenly roared at the sky. Soon after, the 4 types of wind, lightning, rain, and snow energy around the blood-red dragon became extremely terrifying. Then, the blood-red dragon directly collapsed into nothingness. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.